Chapter 551. Sirs, please take care of Shuiyang City. Ren Baqian cupped his fists at Wucheng and Qingyun's sword. The two of us can't stop the army, the two of them said. No problem. Her Majesty will leave 1,000 soldiers here to guard. You just have to be careful not to let the local experts take advantage of the loopholes, Ren Baqian said. There were three most important cities in the Three Rivers Valley. One was Shuiyang City, the other was Yoxin City where Taizai was, and the last was Chun City where Raoyu was. Shuiyang City faced the Wang Estuary, Yoxin City faced the Ghost Ridge in the northwest, and Chun City was in the south. The three cities supported each other. In particular, Shuiyang City was the most important city in between the two cities. Originally, the rebel army was going to delay the Aboriginal army in Shuiyang City. When the other two cities arrived, the Aboriginals would be attacked from three sides. However, they didn't expect that Shuiyang City would be breached in just one night. Xiekuan was defeated and escaped with tens of thousands of soldiers. At this time, the Empress was preparing to attack Yoxin City in the northwest, because it was the only way to threaten the Aboriginals' food supply. However, she was worried that Raoyu would take advantage of this opportunity to attack, so she left 1,000 soldiers in Shuiyang City. Ren Baqian also asked Wucheng and Qingyun's sword to guard the city. It was impossible for them to attack the city, but it was still possible for them to guard the city, and they didn't refuse. 1,000 Aboriginal soldiers were enough to be used as 10,000 soldiers. Moreover, they were guarding the city. Even if they were attacked, they could hold out for 2 days. Instead, they had to be careful of the enemy experts' surprise attacks. There wasn't much difference between a spirit will expert killing a will expert and an ordinary person. Killing 1,000 was definitely much easier than killing 10,000. I'll leave that sleeping fellow to you. If the enemy experts are difficult to deal with, call her. Ren Baqian took out a bag of white rabbit creamy candy and threw it to Wucheng. Just give this to her when the time comes. Ren Baqian now trusted Wucheng more than Qingyun's sword. Wucheng wasn't as idealistic as Qingyun's sword. The Lingshan sect was his root. Now, other than Wucheng and sect master Su Xing, there were only a few people left in the Soul Mountain sect. The rest had all entered the rear guard commandery. On the other hand, even though Qingyun's sword was the first to surrender, he had too many thoughts and misgivings. As a result, he was always restrained. Even when Ren Baqian forced him to do a few things, he was still unable to act freely. This made Ren Baqian somewhat dissatisfied. After chatting with them for a while, Ren Baqian let them leave. The two of them walked out of the house side by side. Wucheng said lightly, "What are you hesitating for? Being overcautious and indecisive won't accomplish anything." After he finished speaking, he did not look at Qingyun's sword's reaction and walked along the stone path, disappearing into the crowd in just a few steps. Qingyun's sword stood there in a daze for a long time, before heading in another direction. Not long after the two of them left, Ren Baqian followed the Empress's carriage out of the west gate under the escort of the army and headed northwest. "How long do you think it will take for Raoyu to come?" the Empress asked faintly as she reclined on the animal skin and ate some fruits. "When we arrive at Yoxin City. The general guarding the city is Hongcheng. As the saying goes, like father, like son, I believe he will be able to defend the city. Moreover, your Majesty has left 200 of your sharpest knives for him, which should be enough to deal with most situations." Ren Baqian laughed. Furthermore, he had left so many skunk bombs. As he spoke, his gaze swept across the Empress's exquisite body, which was wrapped in a red muslin. The Empress said in an eerie voice, "If you continue to look, I will gouge your eyeballs out." She even licked her lips as she spoke, which made her look even more seductive. It was the complete opposite of her tone, which made people feel as if they had been doused with a bucket of water from a well. "Your Majesty's appearance has already been engraved in my heart. Unless I gouge my heart out," Ren Baqian said as he covered his chest. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan stuck out their tongues. Sir Ren was still the most daring. The Empress glared at him fiercely. She liked and hated shameless Ren Baqian at the same time. "You dog," the Empress said with a soft voice and a soft gaze. Even though she said such vulgar words, her soft voice made people's hearts burn. "Your Majesty, where did you learn this?" If the officials in the imperial court heard this, they would definitely skin me alive. Ren Baqian looked at the Empress's suddenly gentle face and asked with a smile. His fingers danced on the ground and jumped onto the back of the Empress's hand. Then, the guards at the side saw a person fly out of the imperial carriage. Damn it! Ren Baqian sat back on the fork-horned cow and muttered to himself. You were the one who seduced me, yet you kicked me out. Your tricks are getting more and more sophisticated. After walking for half a day, everyone stopped to rest at noon. Lunch was 4 fist-sized coarse grain dumplings and a little meat soup. Not long after everyone started eating, the periphery began to become chaotic. What's the matter? The Empress asked with a frown. Sir Run. What happened? Hong Wan asked Ren Baqian. I will go and take a look. Ren Baqian was about to go forward with a barbecued meat bun in his mouth when a Baihu ran to his side and said, Sir, a large number of poisonous insects have appeared outside. What happened? It should be the insect soldiers of the 6 doors. Since they are insect soldiers, there must be someone controlling them. Find them and kill them. Ren Baqian said coldly. He had heard a little about the 6 doors, so he immediately calmed down. He walked forward as he spoke and found a tall figure standing outside the crowd. Qing Ping. He waved his long saber, and the ground in front of him seemed to have been plowed. All the soil was turned up, and masses of yellow and green liquid burst out of the soil. Ren Baqian looked ahead with rapt attention, and finally saw clearly. The ground in front of him was covered with snakes and insects of all sizes wriggling on the ground. There were spiders, snakes, centipedes, and unknown insects. It was colorful and densely packed, and it was disgusting. In particular, the rustling sound they made when they crawled made people's scalps go numb. Captain Qing, these insects should be controlled by someone. Listen and see if there are any strange sounds. Ren Baqian said from behind Qing Ping. After speaking, Ren Baqian listened attentively, but there were no strange sounds at all. There was only the rustling sound of crawling everywhere. Qing Ping slashed again, listened attentively, and then frowned. Obviously, he didn't hear anything either. Anyone who can find out who is controlling these poisonous insects will be rewarded handsomely. Ren Baqian shouted to the people behind him. Sir, they might not be directly controlled by someone. A Baihu stepped forward and said, I found this. As he spoke, he took out a plant with fragmented yellow flowers in his hand. What's this? Ren Baqian asked. This is a ginger flower. There's nothing special about it, but if it's sprinkled with a special powder, it can emit a smell that many poisonous insects like. The ginger flower that we found in our resting spot had been sprinkled with this powder. In other words, these snakes and insects weren't controlled by someone to attack us, but we blocked their way. How do you know all this? Ren Baqian asked. When I was in the south back then, I coincidentally learned about some miscellaneous methods, the Baihu said. How did they know that we would rest here? Who found this place? Ren Baqian asked with cold eyes. Sir, they might not have known where we would rest. This type of ginger flower is very common. If I were to do it, I would just need to sprinkle the powder on the ginger flowers in every spacious place that is suitable for setting up camp and resting. When the army rested, they would release the insects from a distance, and they would naturally come to us. If one didn't know, it would be easy to think that these snakes and insects were being controlled to come to us. Well done. Ren Baqian patted his shoulder and praised him. In other words, as long as we retreat, everything will be fine, right? Yes. Everyone retreat to the road. Carefully check if there are any small red flowers on the ground, Shiwanya, who had just arrived, shouted after hearing this. After a while, everyone returned to the road, and found that there were many such small flowers at the edge of the road. There were even some that had been thrown to the ground in the middle of the road. These things weren't easy to attract attention. If it weren't for that Baihu, they would have suffered quite a bit. After burying the ginger flowers that had been thrown on the road, the snakes and insects stopped advancing when they reached the roadside. Instead, they surrounded the ginger flowers and crawled up and down. Finally, they gathered into a group of insects, which made people's scalps go numb. What's your name? Ren Baqian called the Baihu over and asked. Sir, I'm Yu Kaiyang. As I said just now, If the person controlling the snakes and insects is caught, you will be rewarded handsomely. Even though you didn't catch the person controlling the snakes and insects, you have made a great contribution. Take note that Yu Kaiyang will be promoted by 2 ranks, and will be promoted to a Baihu. Thank you, sir. Yu Kaiyang said happily. Well done. Ren Baqian was very satisfied. Well done. A burly voice came from the side. Ren Baqian turned his head and saw Shi Wanya nodding at him. Thank you for your praise, sir and Protector General. Yu Kaiyang said. You may leave. I'll get someone to send the token to you later. As for the warrant, I'll make it up in the future, Ren Baqian said. After Yu Kaiyang left, Ren Baqian turned to Shi Wanya and said, It seems like we really have to be more careful along the way. I heard that in addition to the insect soldiers, the 6 doors also have monkey soldiers and elephant soldiers, which are very difficult to deal with. As soon as Ren Baqian finished speaking, he felt the ground begin to shake. The source of the shaking was in front of them. This shaking seems like a large number of cavalrymen are attacking in this direction. The rebel army definitely wouldn't dare to face them head-on. Since they aren't cavalrymen, it seems like they are elephant soldiers. Ren Baqian, who had just seen the insect soldiers, suddenly had this thought. Since the insect soldiers had appeared, it was reasonable for the elephant soldiers to appear as well. If he and the others didn't notice the problem with the first wave of attacks with the insects, he was afraid that some people would be injured. However, they would eventually realize that the attacks on the road were relatively less and retreat here. After that, the elephant soldiers would charge over. If everyone blocked the path of the elephant soldiers, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. If they entered the bushes on both sides, they would become food for the insects. The other party's plan was really good. Ren Baqian looked forward as he thought about it. He then saw the behemoths, which were up to 6 meters tall, and had tusks that were more than 3 meters long, charging in this direction. Chapter 552. This elephant is really big. Ren Baqian muttered to himself as he looked at the giant elephants that were rushing over from a distance. They were more than 6 meters tall, and looked like a 2-story building when they stood there. 2 of these elephants were pushing over as if a building was pushing over, not to mention their 3-meter-long tusks, which were full of deterrence. Moreover, this elephant's body was covered in rattan armor. Almost everything above the knee was wrapped in rattan armor. Even the elephant's trunk was covered with rings of rattan. On the back of each elephant sat a person wearing a brightly colored feather cloak. There were both men and women. Ren Baqian looked from afar, and saw that these 2 elephants weren't the only ones. It was just that these 2 elephants were in front like a wall that was pushing over, making it easy for people to overlook the fact that there were 2 similar elephants behind them. Ren Baqian took out 2 flash bombs from his bag, weighed them in his hand, estimated the distance, pulled out the rings, and threw them forward. Although it was daytime, the flash bombs were still quite powerful and could cause quite a lot of noise. The rattan armor on the elephant soldiers could block swords, but it couldn't stop the flash bombs from blinding and deafening the elephants. Even if a human was hit by a flash bomb, they would inevitably panic, let alone an animal. It was enough as long as the elephant soldiers couldn't distinguish the direction and run around. Lower your head and close your eyes. Ren Baqian shouted as he threw the flash bombs. Be careful, sir. Ren Baqian heard the shout behind him just as he lowered his head. He didn't have time to think and took advantage of the situation to fall back. An arrow flew over him with a strong gust of wind. He saw a man standing on the elephant with a bow and arrow in his hand, still maintaining his shooting posture. In the next second, his eyes lit up and then turned black. The loud noise made him dizzy and lose his 5 senses. He was shocked and didn't know what was going on. Along with him, the 2 giant elephants and the controllers on their backs were blinded by the 2 flash bombs that were thrown one after another. The giant elephants were shocked, let out a long howl, and immediately braked before running to both sides in panic. Then, the 2 giant elephants at the back were revealed. On top of them was a monkey with long reddish-brown hair, and a few spirit wheel experts sitting cross-legged. Monkey first grimaced in pain and scratched his ears and cheeks. Then he let out a strange cry and leaped high into the air with the other martial artists, pouncing towards the crowd. You've got guts, daring to come and intercept us. You've made me think highly of you. But since you're here, just stay here. You're going to die sooner or later anyway. The scenery here is picturesque. It's a good place to bury you. Xuanya laughed heartily and blocked Monkey with his long saber, while Qingping and Zongshan blocked the other spirit wheel experts. As the monkey and the spirit wheel experts fought, they lured the three of them to a distant place. Xuanya and the others also fell into their trap and followed them. Be careful of the surrounding forest and see if there are any monkeys. Rinpoche shouted as he grabbed 2 flash grenades in his hands. The insect soldiers and elephant soldiers of the 6 doors had appeared, so would the monkey soldiers be far away? At this moment, Rinpoche had completely figured out the other party's plan. First, they attacked with poisonous insects, forcing everyone onto the main road. They couldn't escape into the bushes and woods on both sides. Then a few giant elephants pushed over like a wall. At the same time, they used experts to restrain Xuanya and the others. Even if the elephant soldiers caused some casualties and confusion in the army, they couldn't cause too many casualties. After all, there were too few of them. The road was too narrow, and only 2 elephants could pass in front. If they died, they would block the path of the elephants behind. Therefore, only 4 elephants were used to create confusion and attract attention. At this time, a real weapon was needed to cause casualties to the army and achieve their goal. There are a lot of monkeys in the trees on both sides. Be careful. When Rinpoche heard the sound of something piercing through the air, goosebumps appeared all over his body. He hurriedly flipped off the 4-horned cow and landed on the ground. After a few spluttering sounds, the 4-horned cow let out a blood-curdling shriek and fell to the ground. Rinpoche looked around and saw bone spears shooting out from the forest. Looking into the forest, he saw a few monkeys with short brown fur, about half the height of a human, appearing on the branches. Each of them had a few bone spears tied to their backs, and they were throwing them down as they jumped on the trees. Rinpoche didn't know what species these monkeys were, but they were extremely strong. The bone spears they threw could directly penetrate the 4-horned cow from dozens of meters away, and even 1/3 of the spears were embedded in the soil. As expected, Rinpoche understood and threw 2 flash bombs in front of the elephants. He then pulled over the backpack that was hanging on the 4-horned cow, took out a handful of flash bombs, and threw them to the guards at the side. Throw them into the forest. More than 20 flash bombs were thrown out, blinding all the monkeys in the forest. One by one, they lost their balance and fell from the trees while squeaking. The rest of the monkeys were also shocked and quickly ran away while squeaking. Captain Gong, don't let the winged cavalry enter the forest. Use bone spears. Rinpoche shouted. The bone spears that the monkeys threw were shot back at their original owners, piercing the blinded monkeys to the ground. Rinpoche quickly rushed to the front of the Empress's carriage, and saw that there were many broken bone spears that were made by the guards. Rinpoche raised his voice and asked, "Your Majesty, are you alarmed?" Hong Wan pulled the curtain aside, and saw the Empress lying in a reclining position with a wine cup in front of her eyes. The sunlight shone on the cup, forming a lifelike phoenix on the wall. The Empress looked down at Rinpoche and said, "How could anything happen to me in such a situation? Go and do what you need to do." There was some appreciation and joy in her eyes. Rinpoche was no longer the weak chicken that needed protection, and couldn't even trust a chicken. He had begun to be able to take charge. "Yes," Rinpoche replied. He naturally knew that nothing would happen to the Empress, but he still had to show the proper attitude. Rinpoche then asked his men to do a head count, and found that there were very few casualties. Although these monkey soldiers were pretty strong, they were only a lot stronger than ordinary people, and were far from the strength of a manual expert. If the troops were in chaos, they could still take advantage of the situation. However, the poisonous insects were reminded by someone, and the elephants were dealt with a few flash bombs. Rinpoche reminded them that the monkeys were facing an intact army, following which, a large number of them were blinded by the flash bombs, and the rest fled. There seemed to be a lot of bone spears, but only a dozen or so unlucky fellows were pierced by the spears. There were also some abrasions, but they didn't suffer too much damage. After understanding the situation, Shi Wanya and the others returned one after another. Damn, they ran so fast. Qingping cursed. None of them survived? Ren Baqian asked casually. He looked at the three of them and found that they didn't have any injuries. That giant snake from last time was also there, and I was almost bitten. Zongshan said. It was Mongshan. Ren Baqian corrected Lin Xiaola since she wasn't around. Haha, that girl. Upon hearing this, the others also thought of Lin Xiaola and burst out laughing. Protector General Shi, Her Majesty said that it's time to set off. Hong Wan landed beside them in a flash and said in a crisp voice. After walking for more than 2 hours, everyone arrived near a hill. Sir, there are traces of elephant soldiers. There are at least 200 of them. A Baihu came up to report. Ren Baqian followed the Baihu to the back of the hill and saw a large area of messy footprints. It seemed that they had stayed here not long ago and were ready to launch a surprise attack when everyone arrived nearby. However, the army in the forest was almost unscathed, so these elephant soldiers had no choice but to retreat. Ren Baqian looked at the traces and pondered. This kind of elephant was huge and powerful. If 100 or 200 of them were to charge at the same time, it would be like a collapsing mountain. If the two armies were to confront each other, with these elephant soldiers as the vanguard and the main army following behind, the aboriginals would suffer heavy losses even if they won. Fortunately, he had a lot of flash bombs on hand, which were enough to restrain these elephants. However, after eliminating the 6 doors in the future, he would have to get his hands on their method of nurturing elephant soldiers. Chapter 553. The Aboriginal army moved much faster than the ordinary army. After all, the weakest among them was a man-wheel expert, and their physical strength and speed were incomparable to that of an ordinary army. They traveled all the way until midnight, and they were already within 30 miles of Yoshin City. Next, they looked for a suitable place to set up camp. Since the other party had elephant soldiers and insect soldiers, they were more cautious this time. They found a place close to a water source and was on high ground. Then, they cut down all the sparse trees in the surrounding area, and everything within 4 to 5 kilometers could be seen at a glance. After setting up camp, everyone took the opportunity to rest. 2 hours later, the sky began to brighten. More than 10 kilometers away from where they set up camp, a small, inconspicuous city stood there. They only set up camp and rest at dawn. We should go out of the city to fight. A valiant-looking young man said as he looked into the distance. This person was the chief of the North Alliance, Tai Zai. He was frowning and holding his breath. Mr. Bu, please send the elephant soldiers to help us. Chief Tai, we don't know what they use to blind people. If they still have this thing, our elephant soldiers won't be of much use. Mr. Bu, who was wearing a colorful feather shawl, spoke up. His expression was similar to Tai Zai's. If it's a night battle or a city defense battle, the elephant soldiers won't be useful. The thing in their hands is even more powerful at night. Xiekuan, who was in a slightly sorry state, said. His expression wasn't much different from the two people in front of him. I have already told you the details of the battle in Shuiyang City. Shuiyang City was defeated because we didn't expect the other party to have such a thing, and we lost the city wall almost instantly. In my opinion, the other party only set up camp near dawn and is preparing for another night attack tonight. What the chief said is highly possible. Tai Zai nodded in agreement. Otherwise, the army could usually set up camp and rest in the evening. Now they had traveled until late at night and only rested when it was close to dawn. With the speed of the aboriginals, they could cover a distance of more than 10 kilometers in less than 4 hours. After resting for a while, they could attack the city. Presumably, the other party had this in mind. If you fight during the day, let's not talk about whether the other party will accept the challenge. As long as they send troops to kill you when you return to the city at night, so what? You will definitely lose. Mr. Ning said as he waved his fan nearby. Now he could only wave the fan to blow away the smell on his body so that he wouldn't feel so smelly. However, that suffocating smell continued to bore into the noses of the others. If it had been someone else, The three of them would have chopped them up and buried them 5 meters underground. What do you think, Mr. Ning? Taizai couldn't help but cover his nose, but it didn't improve much. We'll wait for them in the city tonight, and we'll set fire everywhere. Once they are lured into the depths of the city, we will set fire to the city, Mr. Ning said. The three of them were shocked. What about the people in the city? When the time comes, the commoners will scatter and flee in all directions, which will also hinder their movements. The best outcome would naturally be for everyone in the city to die with the barbarians. As far as I know, this city originally had a population of 120,000, but now there are only 100,000. Whether it's worth it for 100,000 people to perish together with 10,000 barbarians, that's up to you. At the very least, in a normal battle, an army of 100,000 would not be a match for those 10,000 barbarians. Mr. Ning's awe-inspiring words made Taizai's entire body turn cold. Everyone was silent for a moment, and Xie Kuan was the first to speak. I think this plan is feasible. Commander Xie, go. Xie Kuan's words made Taizai feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Chief Tai, I know that you are benevolent and righteous. However, the lives of the commoners are lives. Aren't the soldiers under your command raised by their parents? To kill these barbarians, I don't know how many lives will be sacrificed. What we are doing is also for the lives of the millions of people in Tianjing Basin. Also, the previous chief died in the hands of Qi Zixiao, and the hatred of his father's death is absolutely irreconcilable. Don't you want to take revenge? Xie Kuan asked. I want to take revenge and defeat those barbarians, but I can't do that. Taizai growled in a low voice. Then do you have any other ideas? Qi Zixiao, Shi Wanya, Zhong Shen Qingping, and that unknown girl. There are so many experts. Even if we use all our strength, we won't be able to contend against them. Not to mention the winged cavalry. Do you know what the consequences will be if we lose? Everyone in Tianjing Basin will be enslaved by the barbarians, and their life and death will be at their whim. As for you, me, the North Alliance, the Southern Metropolis, and the Green Bellflower, everyone will die without a burial place. Do you want to see the remaining members of the Tai family hanging on the city walls, and their corpses being eaten by those birds and beasts? Mr. Ning, is there any other way? Can't we defeat them on the battlefield? Taizai raised his head and looked at Mr. Ning. Chief Tai, aren't you clear on whether or not we can defeat them on the battlefield? The Aboriginals aren't good at strategy and production. They don't have any equipment, but with less than 100,000 soldiers, they were able to suppress Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chen Nation. Half a year ago, the 500,000 soldiers of Great Xia were all well-equipped, elite soldiers and fierce generals. How many of them returned alive? Even Lu Pinghai was beaten to death by Qi Zixiao. Do you really think the Northern Alliance can compare to the Xia? Unless the world's #1 expert takes action, how are you going to defeat Qi Zixiao, who has countless experts under his command? Mr. Ning said coldly. But this isn't the entire Aboriginals, but 10,000 of them. Taizai said with a sinister expression. Yes, so there's still a glimmer of hope. If it were the entire Aboriginals, I wouldn't have come here. You don't have much capital left. Shuiyang City has already been lost, and Governor Xie and the 150,000 soldiers of the North Alliance are all holed up in this small Yoshin city. If you lose again, you won't have another chance. Mr. Ning laughed. The rebels are like the setting sun, displaying everything they have before sinking into the darkness. Ren Baqian said as he looked up at the setting sun. Previously, I saw the 6 doors lead the beast soldiers to attack. Although they were repelled, it was only because the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. In addition, the sword of victory was always on our side. I thought that the rebels would attack first, but I didn't expect them to be holed up in Yoshin City. Ren Baqian turned his head and smiled at the Empress. Why are you speaking so strangely today? The Empress looked up at him. No, I'm just sighing with emotion. Ren Baqian laughed. Where's the poem? I'm still waiting for it. The Empress lazily reclined there, stroked her cheek with her finger, and looked at Ren Baqian. The rebels are like the setting sun. Before sinking into the darkness, they display everything they have for the last time. This is a modern poem. It's very popular on Earth. Ren Baqian laughed heartily. The Empress's mouth twitched as she turned her head and said, Qing Yuan, inform Shiwanya to hurry up and have a meal. We will set off when the sun has completely set. At night, the moon rose above the treetops. The city walls of Yoshin City were brightly lit, and the shadows of people could be seen. Countless people with longbows in their hands widened their eyes as they looked at the army gradually emerging from the darkness. Palm-sized cylinders were suddenly thrown out from the darkness. Be careful. Bang. Beams of white light suddenly exploded in front of everyone. The people on top of the city walls suddenly panicked, and it was unknown how many people were blinded. Don't panic. Take 7 steps back. Back row forward. Following this voice, the people who were blinded retreated 7 steps back in fear and stuck tightly to the wall. The group of people behind them immediately drew their bows and shot downward. However, another batch of flash grenades flew into the air and exploded. Subsequently, hundreds of grenades were thrown to the top of the city wall. Boom. Boom. Sir Run, these things of yours are indeed very useful, Shiwanya praised. Whether it was flash grenades or grenades, the aboriginals could easily break the enemy's battle formation with these. If we can get our hands on nuclear weapons, this world will be peaceful. Rinpochian laughed. What's that? Shiwanya asked. They have occupied the top of the city wall. Protector General, it's time to get ready to enter the city. Rinpochian looked at the top of the city wall in the distance and laughed. Everyone set off. Leave none of the rebels alive. Shiwanya shouted. Chapter 554. At night, Yoshin City was filled with the sounds of fighting. Blood and limbs were splattered everywhere. The sound of steel knives cutting into human bodies made one's teeth ache, and the screams of dying stimulated one's eardrums and brain. Those screams could be heard clearly outside the city. Renbachian and the Empress sat side by side outside the carriage, enjoying the night breeze and the smell of blood that came from afar. Sing a song for me, the Empress suddenly said. I know how to sing Twinkle Little Star. Renbachian was excited. Tonglan, who was in the distance, moved her ears. She had just caught a sentence in the night breeze. Twinkle Little Star. Tonglan gritted her teeth. All the students in the academy had been beaten up by her, and no one knew what Twinkle Little Star was. The Empress looked up at the night sky and said, You sing and I'll listen. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. The sky is full of little stars, shining brightly like many little eyes. Rinpochian hummed softly. The Empress didn't feel that the song was childish. Instead, she felt a different kind of warmth, as if she was listening to a ballad in her mother's arms. It was just that the memory was so long ago that she couldn't even remember it. When she heard this song, she suddenly recalled it from the depths of her memory. After the war is settled, I want to go back to the mountains to take a look, the Empress said. The 60,000 mountains? Renbachian stopped humming and asked. The Empress nodded slightly. Why do you suddenly have such an idea? It is said that my mother's tomb is in the mountains, and she hasn't seen what I look like now. The Empress was a little emotional, which was rare. I will accompany your Majesty to take a look. However, in order to finish the war, Great Xia has to be scared, Renbachian said. Aren't you planning something with that person from Great Xia? The Empress asked. I told your Majesty that if Great Xia is in chaos, we will be safe. Furthermore, 100 million taels of silver can do a lot of things, Renbachian said. The Empress nodded and didn't say anything else. In fact, there is no need to finish the war. As long as there is a radio station, it won't affect state affairs. Renbachian laughed. We can't use it here, the Empress said faintly. Renbachian opened his mouth. Who would have thought that Tianjing Basin would be so strange? Such a large area was actually a land of silence. At this moment, several figures passed through the city and rushed toward where Renbachian and the Empress were. Sir Run, urgent news. Zuolong landed in front of Renbachian and the Empress and shouted. Speak, my lord, the news was left behind by Feng Pingdao Hucheng. Renbachian immediately thought of the person that Zuolong mentioned 2 days ago. He was a lieutenant under Tai Zai, and he didn't know why he had sent a message at this time. The rebels are going to set fire to the city, Zhuolong said coldly. When he saw the news, he was shocked. Then extreme anger rose in him. He was born and raised in Tianjing Basin. Although it was normal for two armies to use any means in a battle, he didn't expect them to be so ruthless. What are they going to do? Ren Baqian's expression became serious. According to the information left behind by Hu Cheng, the rebels have placed many fire starters everywhere in the city. Once they lure our army into the depths of the city, they will set fire to the city. I have already checked just now and saw oil cans and dry firewood in many places. Most of them are in some corners or courtyards. If one didn't know beforehand, it would be very difficult to discover them. Sir, most of the houses in Yoshin City are made of wood. Once the fire starts, it will be difficult to control. Not only will our army suffer heavy casualties, but even the people in the city will have a hard time escaping. The oil cans here were filled with animal fat. Didn't the people in the city evacuate first? Ren Baqian was a little surprised. No, otherwise, they would have realized something was wrong the moment they entered the city. They are really ruthless and vicious. Ren Baqian suddenly laughed coldly. A cornered dog will do something desperate. These rebels are really crazy to want hundreds of thousands of people in the city to be buried with them. Sir, what should we do? Zhuolong asked. Pass down my order. Everyone from the protectorate will first take away the oil cans on both sides of the main road, pile the firewood together, and leave someone to guard it to ensure that the army is safe when they evacuate. After that, use the main road as the axis and spread out in all directions, mainly searching for the oil cans, Ren Baqian said in a deep voice. In a city like this, most people didn't die from being burned to death, but from suffocation due to the smoke. Even if they weren't burned, they would still die from inhaling large amounts of carbon monoxide, hypoxia, and other reasons. As long as the main road was safe, they could at least buy some time for the army to evacuate. After that, they would take away the oil cans in other places. Without the oil cans, even if the fire started, it wouldn't be difficult to clean up immediately. Yes. Your Majesty, what do you think? Ren Baqian turned his head and asked. Inform the winged cavalry to block the other 3 city gates and trap the rebels in the city, the Empress said coldly. Originally, in order to reduce casualties, they planned to leave 2 gates for the rebels to escape, and then pursue them all the way. Now the Empress had changed her mind. Your Majesty, if that's the case, I'm afraid that they won't burn the city. Instead, they will fight with their lives on the line, and I'm afraid that there will be more casualties in the end. Why don't we wait for them to start the fire before blocking the other 3 city gates? Ren Baqian said coldly. You reap what you sow. Originally, I didn't think of doing this, but since they want to set the city on fire, they can't blame anyone else. Let them perish together with Yoshin City. Sir, then the commoners in the city. Even though Zhuolong's name was cold, he was warm-hearted. After hearing Ren Baqian's words, he quivered. Inform Protector General Shi of this matter, and ask him to reduce the intensity of the attack. Delay for time and strengthen the attack after most of the oil cans in the south of the city have been transported away. As for the commoners, when the time comes, get someone to lead the commoners in the other 3 directions to escape from the south of the city. How many of them can escape will depend on their fate. Zhuolong was very grateful after hearing this arrangement. He didn't expect the 3 local powers to burn the city and let the hundreds of thousands of commoners die in the sea of fire, just to prevent the aboriginal army from discovering the problem in advance. However, Ren Baqian, who always gave him the impression that he was a ruthless superior, actually gave the commoners a way out. Even though this would inevitably result in a lot of casualties, it could be said that countless people had already survived. Relay these words to Protector General Shi. Get people to keep an eye on the movements of the rebels from high ground. If they discover that the 3 gates are impassable after the fire starts and a large number of soldiers want to break through the south gate, intercept them immediately. As for you guys, after leading the commoners to escape to the south of the city, roam the city and kill small groups of rebels. Understood, sir, Zhuolong replied. Regret. Chapter 555. Following Ren Baqian's order, The people from the rearguard commandery began to move. Figures jumped from rooftop to rooftop, landed somewhere from time to time, picked up 2 jars, and headed in a certain direction. Since the rebels were prepared to fight and retreat at the same time to lure the aboriginals to the center of the city, there weren't many troops left in the south of the city. The people from the rearguard commandery didn't encounter any obstacles. There's 1 here and 2 in the northwest. An old man stood on the roof and pointed. 3 younger men and women immediately jumped down in the direction he pointed. Soon they left with the oil cans. The old man's ears twitched. The shouts in front seemed to have lessened. I didn't expect you to have such a plan. It's simply sinful, the old man muttered to himself. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man jumped a few times on the roof. Then, he looked around and found an oil can under a pile of firewood at the back of one of the courtyards. He placed the can on the roof and searched in other directions. Was there a sound on the roof just now? In the house below, a woman was huddled in the arms of a man with a terrified look on her face. Don't think too much. The man forced himself to calm down and said, even if the sky is overturned outside, we will be fine as long as we hide in the house. Although he said this, his face was deathly pale. As time passed, Shiwanya stood on the roof and looked at the slow advance in front of him. His eyes were like an eagle's as he scanned the distance from time to time. His gaze seemed to be able to penetrate the darkness and see the people moving in the dark. Reporting to Protector General Shi, most of the oil jars in the south of the city have been found. Zwalung reported respectfully as he landed near Shiwanya. Shiwanya nodded and then raised his voice. Hurry up. I hope that by daybreak, there will only be corpses left in the city. Kill. As Shiwanya's voice spread out in the night, the shouts suddenly became louder. In an inconspicuous house in the west of the city, the windows were wide open, and there wasn't any light coming out of the room. Only with the help of the moonlight could a few figures be seen sitting in the room. Mr. Ning tilted his head and listened in the distance. Their attack has intensified again. Tai Zai's face was ashen and he remained silent. Based on this intensity, it will take about an hour to reach the City Lord's mansion. Let the fire start from the City Lord's mansion. With the power of a prairie fire, it will burn the entire city. Mr. Ning revealed a smile. It was a rare sight to see an entire city buried along with an aboriginal army. It made his heart beat a little faster. When they attack the City Lord's mansion, we will retreat, Xiekuan said. It's a pity that we can't watch such a scene in the city, Mr. Ning said with some regret. Mr. Ning. Tai Zai suddenly spoke. Alliance Master Tai, what's the matter? Mr. Ning turned to look at him. However, he only saw a snow-white light in the darkness, causing his pupils to rapidly dilate. Clang. The sound of swords clashing rang out. Are you crazy? Xiekuan blocked Tai Zai's sword with his long saber, his face full of disbelief. You want to kill me? Mr. Ning was also surprised. Regardless of the outcome of this battle, he's already useless. If we win, the ancient race will be defeated and will no longer be able to stop us. There's no point in keeping this person alive. If we lose, even if we escape, we will no longer be able to contend against the ancient race. There's no point in keeping this person alive. Tai Zai had a crazed look on his face as he growled. Let him accompany the commoners in this city and die together. Ha 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 ha. Mr. Ning convulsed with laughter. I'm only the one who came up with the plan, but you are the one who actually implemented it. Now you can't bear the sin in your heart and want to put the blame on me? You've deceived yourself to this extent. You don't even have the slightest bit of responsibility. How are you going to lead the Northern Alliance? That's right, you are deceiving yourself. Xiekuan's face was ashen as he growled. Do you think this battle is over? What happens after that? Who will divert the energy of the aboriginals? Where will we get weapons? We can send more people to the Yun Nation, or even Great Xia. No one will know how he died. Even if they knew, they wouldn't care as long as we are still of value. In order to exterminate the aboriginals, I will have no face to lead the Northern Alliance after this battle. Tai Zai said. What do you mean? Xiekuan was shocked again. Tianjing Basin doesn't need 3 factions. As long as you can settle the Green Bell Flower, you can become the ruler of Tianjing Basin. The three factions have been fighting for decades, and it's time to end it, Taizai said coldly. My last request is to kill him. Taizai glanced at Mr. Ning. Mr. Ning's expression changed. Don't forget that you were the one who gave the order. You are right about one thing. It's not a loss to exchange the lives of this city's commoners for the lives of 10,000 barbarians. However, these commoners will be under the rule of the Northern Alliance for generations to come. Therefore, I will die with you and the people of Yoshin City. Taizai's eyes were filled with madness. You are crazy, you are really crazy, Mr. Ning shouted. You are crazy, Xiaoquan also said. Although he was the one who proposed the plan, you were the one who gave the order. Now you want to kill him? Although I don't know why you are crazy, I don't want to stop you. As Xiaoquan spoke, he suddenly loosened his grip, and Taizai's sword pierced into Mr. Ning's chest like a dragon. Hee hee. Mr. Ning hugged the sword in his chest and laughed bitterly. What a pitiful person. He then fell to the ground. Do you know that I once thought of dragging you to death with me? However, Tianjing Basin needs a leader, and that woman, Rao Yu, can't do it. Taizai looked at Xiaoquan and sneered. He pulled out his sword and strode out of the room. Mr. Ning, you know that I can't refuse. Xiaoquan sheathed his sword and lowered his head. Hee. A bunch of wishful thinking people. Mr. Ning muttered to himself as he spat out blood. Wishful thinking? Maybe. How would you know if you don't try? Xiaoquan laughed. Taizai looked at the blood-stained sword in his hand in the courtyard and remained silent. A man in black landed beside him and said, Sir, there are many martial artists traversing the rooftops in the city. It seems like they are looking for something. It seems like they have discovered it. In that case, pass down the order and let's begin. Taizai finished speaking and strode out of the courtyard. The direction he was heading in was the place where the battle was the most intense. One by one, the guards in the courtyard started to follow behind him. All of you can leave and leave. They are still fighting and they need a leader, Taizai said without turning his head. But it would be too shabby if the leader doesn't have guards around him, a guard behind him said. Following Taizai's departure, 500 men in black spread out and went to various places in the city. They took out cans of oil from under the pile of firewood in each corner and poured it on the firewood or on the rooftops. When the warlord's residence in the center of the city lit up with a huge flame, sparks lit up everywhere in the city and began to spread and spread. However, looking from a high vantage point, these sparks were all in the east, west, and north of the city. In the south of the city, a man in black rushed to the location where the firewood and oil cans were placed. He was stunned for a moment because the firewood and oil cans that were originally placed there had disappeared. He then rushed to another location, but a sword suddenly fell from the sky and nailed him to the ground. In another place, a man in black searched 3 locations and found that all the oil cans had disappeared. In one place, even the firewood was gone. In the end, he had no choice but to take out a match, squat down, and use it to light the firewood. However, a figure suddenly appeared behind him and slapped him on the head. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. A man in black was looking for the storage location of the oil cans. On a tree behind him, Renbachian sat on a branch, leisurely took out his gun, unlocked the safety, and aimed at the rats below. Bang! 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 Chapter 556. Boom. The east, west, and north city gates of Yoshin City collapsed with a loud bang. Huge rocks smashed into the positions where the city gates had been. Under the despairing gazes of the rebel soldiers who were about to retreat, the city gates were firmly blocked. Move the rocks. We will all die if we don't get out. A person who looked like a general shouted from within the city. However, what greeted him was a series of grenades thrown from the city walls. At this time, the fire and blood were intertwined in Yoshin City, and the sounds of killing were still incessant. More than half of the city was engulfed in flames. Countless people who were hiding in their homes were driven out by the fire or engulfed by the flames. The thick smoke forced people to cover their mouths, lower their bodies, and flee in panic. The commoners were like fish in a net. Everywhere they looked, there were flames. It was as if the entire city had fallen into a sea of fire. This made them even more panicked. Most of them subconsciously ran in the direction of the nearest city gate. Run to the south of the city. There's no fire there. A voice came from an unknown location, causing many of the panicking commoners to subconsciously run toward the south of the city. The flow of people led to even more people. People tended to follow the crowd, especially during such a disaster. Figures stood on the roofs of houses outside the line of fire, looking down at the panicking commoners in the dark. From time to time, the glow of weapons would flash, followed by the blood-curdling screams of people dying. Some of the rebel soldiers who were squeezed into the crowd spat out blood and fell to the ground. The Empress stood at the top of the city gate and looked down at the city that had fallen into a sea of fire. Renbachian was half a body behind her. "Your Majesty, sir, the refugees are surging over," Zwilung said in a deep voice as he landed 10 meters away from them. "Open the city gate. Let them leave the city and send someone with a loud voice to tell them who started the fire," Renbachian said. At this time, he could already see the surging crowd below squeezing toward the city gate. Even though it could be considered safe once they reached the south of the city, most of the commoners in the entire city were rushing toward this area. It was already overcrowded, and the crowd was pushing and shoving toward the city gate. Trampling, violence, and all kinds of other things were happening almost all the time. Qingping landed in front of the Empress and reported with a head in his hand. "Your Majesty, one of the traitors, Tai Zai, has been beheaded." "Got it." The Empress didn't even look at them. She turned to Renbachian and said, "Even if these people manage to escape today, they won't be able to hold on until the rations are distributed. Your Majesty, please issue a decree to transfer food and kanji from Xueyang and the other cities to help them. When you distribute the kanji, tell them who gave them the food. The people who escaped here will definitely remember your Majesty's kindness." Renbachian thought for a moment and said, "There's no more food in Jiangbei. When the army left, the surplus food was taken away," the Empress said. Although it seemed like she had allowed him to do whatever he wanted recently, it didn't mean that she didn't know anything. "The provisions in Xueyang City can support us for a few days, but we need the army to return and then transfer the provisions here. It will take at least 3 days. I don't know how many things will happen in these 3 days." "Then what is His Majesty's plan?" "Let the people in the south of the city take out their surplus food and distribute it according to the number of people. It should be able to last for at least a few days. After that, we can transfer food over to ensure that they won't starve to death." As for whether the citizens of the south of the city were willing or not, it was not within her consideration. She was already very kind to make such an arrangement. "Your Majesty, this is the behavior of a wise ruler," Renbachian said. "Do you mean that I was a fatuous ruler in the past?" The Empress turned her head and glanced at him. "How is that possible?" "It's just that your Majesty's wisdom in the past was for the sake of the Aboriginals," Renbachian replied. "I see that you have put in a lot of effort for these people these days. We can't let them starve to death," the Empress said faintly. At this time, the area below them was in chaos. Countless people were squeezed together, crying and screaming. The Empress released her aura, which was like a mountain suppressing everyone's heart. The people below immediately quieted down. Everyone felt as if their necks were being strangled, and even breathing became difficult. The Empress withdrew her aura without saying a word. The victims below covered their mouths and didn't dare to make a sound. "As expected of your Majesty, just by your aura alone, you are able to calm these panicking people down," Renbachian praised. "The fire is spreading." The Empress ignored him and looked into the distance. "Guards." Renbachian raised his head, took a glance, and ordered the guards. "Start from the location near the fire, and inform the people in the south of the city to leave their houses with food, and leave the city immediately. In addition, let Protector General Shi send some people to maintain order and prevent chaos among the victims outside the city." The two of them stood on top of the city wall until the sky turned bright, and the shouting in the distance became softer. That night, Shi Wanya and the soldiers of the Protectorate of the South gradually retreated with the fire, and kept the rebel soldiers who wanted to rush out of the city. The winged cavalry stopped the rebel soldiers who wanted to climb over the city wall and escape. As for the protectorate, after guiding the civilians and clearing up the scattered soldiers, they were put into maintaining order outside the city. Of the 150,000 rebel soldiers, only a few managed to escape. Other than dying under swords, they were suffocated due to lack of oxygen in the fire. Your Majesty, it's over, Ren Baqian said from behind the Empress. The Empress's red figure flashed on the city wall and disappeared as she returned to her carriage. When the Empress left, Ren Baqian stretched out his hand but grabbed nothing. With his hands behind his back, he leisurely walked down the city wall and could still hear the voices of the people in the distance. Don't you know who set the oil cans in firewood? Her Majesty saved your lives and gave you a way out. All the food will be distributed according to the number of people. As long as you hold on for a few days, the food from Xiuyang City will keep you from starving. Zuolong. Sir Ren. Organize these people and find some strong young men to extinguish the fire from the periphery. Search the city for valuables and food that hasn't been destroyed, Ren Baqian said. At this time, most of the people used stone jars to store food. Although some houses had been burned, the food in the stone jars was still edible. In addition, dig a pit outside the city and bury the corpses. This is to prevent an epidemic. Also, arrange for people to check the surroundings of the city to see how many rebel soldiers escaped and which direction they went. After giving instructions, Ren Baqian stood at the city gate and looked at the civilians who were still in fear and sorrow. He then returned to the side of the Empress's carriage, lay on the ground, and closed his eyes to rest. Not long after, 2 pieces of animal skin were thrown out of the carriage and pasted on his face. Thank you, Your Majesty. Ren Baqian happily spread the animal skin under him and fell asleep shortly after. Half a day later, the army returned to Xiuyang City after resting for half a day, except for a few who stayed behind to maintain order. It took them a day and a half to return to Xiuyang City. Before they even entered the city, they smelled blood. After entering the city to understand the situation, Rao Yu led the troops to attack after the army left. The 1,000 Aboriginal soldiers kept the 50,000 rebel soldiers out of the city for 2 days. During this period, Hongqing also drove many strong young men to the top of the city wall to help defend the city, under the threat of swords and blood. These young men were really useful. This caused the morale of the rebel soldiers to plummet, and Rao Yu had no choice but to retreat with hatred. However, this also caused the people of Xiuyang City to panic again. Chapter 557. The 3 of them aren't back yet. After returning to Earth, Ren Baqian and the Empress took a plane back to Shanghai and found it strange that there were only 3 people in the villa. Even if they had to crawl, they should have crawled back to Shanghai in half a month, right? Not only did he buy plane tickets for them, but he also left 50,000 yuan for them. The simplest thing to do would be to take a taxi back to Shanghai. Moreover, the Messier 87 department was watching over them. Nothing could have happened. What happened? The Empress turned to look at him. Ren Baqian explained the situation to her, and she shook her head. Every member of the winged cavalry is a specially selected expert. They won't die even if they are thrown into a dangerous place, let alone on Earth. Although Your Majesty is very confident, your winged cavalry has now dropped from 1,500 to 700. Ren Baqian thought to himself, but didn't dare to say it out loud. I'm not afraid of anything happening to them, but I'm afraid that something will happen to others, Ren Baqian replied. This was what he was most worried about. Could the 3 of them be locked up in some secret base? An Earth wheel expert with an IQ wasn't invincible in the city, but it was enough to make people tremble in fear. However, the crux of the problem was the word, IQ. Although the Aboriginals weren't fools, their brain structure was abnormally simple. Compared to the people on Earth, they were like pure lambs in all aspects other than killing people. And being cheated was a very common thing. The Empress snapped her fingers playfully. She rubbed her middle and index fingers together from the pad of her thumb like a sword, making the sound of a sword piercing through the air. Ren Baqian looked at the hole that suddenly appeared in the wall where the Empress's fingers were pointing, and felt that the snapping of her fingers was so cool. She was indeed the Empress. I'll call the Messier 87 to see if they know their whereabouts. Ren Baqian thought for a while, took out his phone and called Yang Sr. Mr. Run. Yang Sun sighed when he received Renbachian's call. Ever since he became the head of the Messier 87 department, he had sighed more often than he had in the previous half of his life. What's wrong? Renbachian felt that there was something wrong with Yang Sen's tone, and immediately became doubtful. He wondered if the three fellows had caused some big trouble. Nothing much, Mr. Run, you can speak, Yang Sun said. Do you know where my three subordinates, the ones I abandoned in the northeast? Renbachian asked. Mr. Run, those are your subordinates. How dare you ask me where they are? And you don't have to be so confident in your tone, right? Yang Sun said, but he was relieved in his heart. Sure enough, the actions of those three fellows weren't his idea. Although Renbachian had already guessed it from their irregular movements and routes, he was sure of it after hearing Renbachian's words. He didn't have to wonder if there were any problems behind this. Minister Yang definitely knows more about this land than I do. Renbachian laughed. I do know where they are. Right now, they are guests of honor of the neighboring country's third fatty. Yang Sun opened his mouth and said, Pfft. Renbachian immediately spat. His voice rose an octave. What? Where's Sampanzi? Northern Dynasty. Third fatty. The northeast was indeed not far from there, but how did the three of them get there? How did he become that person's distinguished guest? What happened in the 2 weeks that he wasn't around? Why did they go to the Northern Dynasty? Renbachian asked with his eyes wide open. You have to ask them about this. That's all we know. However, I still want to say that these three subordinates of yours smashed a bathing center, a tea house, destroyed a drug trafficking den, 2 prostitution dens, and ran a red light 13 times on horseback. They also injured 7 policemen, 6 urban management officers, and 2 traffic policemen. Fortunately, no one was killed. Yang Sun said faintly. Renbachian's face darkened as Yang Sun spoke. After Yang Sun finished, Renbachian didn't know what to say. Ran a red light 13 times on horseback? Where did they get their horses from? They destroyed a drug trafficking den and 2 prostitution dens. Where did they go? He had lived on Earth for so long and had never come into contact with such things. Can you help me send a message to the 3 of them? Get back here? Renbachian asked with a black face. He wasn't going to go to the Northern Dynasty to get the 3 of them back. It was more reliable for the Messier 87 department to handle this matter. I'll try my best. You must bring the 3 of them back, and tell them that Big Boss is going to skin them. Renbachian continued. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. The Empress looked indifferent. They are too troublesome. Renbachian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Oh. If they are too powerful, give them a few whips. The Empress said. Renbachian grinned. Your Majesty, do you know what the word law means? Do you know how to write this word? Have you seen it before? Renbachian thought about it and sighed again. Well, what you say is the law. Renbachian sat back on the sofa and stopped thinking about those 2 people. He accompanied the Empress to play Honor of Kings, which he hadn't played for a long time. Half an hour later, a player on his side finally wailed. Brothers, do I have any enmity with you? Why do you keep tricking me? Why am I always on the same team as you? Renbachian thought about it and replied. This is love. 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 Brother, I'm still a child. Your love is too deep. It's better to be fair and share some with others. That person wailed. After teasing a few of their companions, the 2 of them went offline contentedly. They watched TV for a while, and Renbachian's attention was suddenly attracted by an advertisement for an educational robot. This suddenly reminded him of something. These days he didn't have the time to teach those students, and it wasn't a good idea to let them wander around with the army. A few months of delay would be wasted. If he could get them a robot and find time to answer some of their questions, it would probably be much faster. After thinking about this matter, Renbachian immediately took out his phone and began to search for information about robots. He found out that robots on Earth had improved a lot in the past 3 years. Modern humans were getting lazier and had a higher and higher quality of life. The huge demand had driven the rapid development of robots. At the very least, The robot that he saw in the advertisement was from a company that he had never heard of before. He was surprised to find out that this company used to make inflatable dolls. This made his eyeballs almost fall out of their sockets. This company first made inflatable dolls, then adult robots. Now even some foreign brothels used their robots to satisfy some customers, and the reviews were pretty good. Since last year, they set up a new company called Linkage Intelligence, and aimed at educational robots. Now they mainly launched family education robots, and they had a good reputation in all aspects. Whether it was the voice recognition system or the conversation system, they were quite logical. Upon seeing this, Ren Baqian began to become interested in this company. However, they were currently making family education robots, which were far from what Ren Baqian wanted. Furthermore, they needed to rely on the internet. The basic requirement for the robot that Ren Baqian needed was to have its own database. As for the voice recognition system and the conversation system, he didn't need to worry about them as they could basically meet his needs. At the thought of this, Ren Baqian called the company. Whenever this happened, Ren Baqian felt that being rich was indeed a pleasant thing. This was especially true on Earth, where money could solve most problems as long as it was within the scope of current technology. For example, the current situation. However, he still needed to know the level of this company and whether it could meet his requirements. Otherwise, he would have to find another company. High-end robots had always been the target of the other party. After hearing Ren Baqian's request, they were very interested. Chapter 558. The laboratory of Linkage Intelligence wasn't far from Shanghai. It was located in Hangzhou, which was known as the land of fish and rice, the land of silk, and heaven on earth. Of course, the most praised thing about Hangzhou was the romance that was circulating here. The protagonists were a human and a snake. Ren Baqian had never been able to figure out how their child came to be. Ren Baqian told the Empress about his itinerary, and she was very interested in these so-called robots. After all, she found it very novel that these robots were completely made of machinery, could speak, communicate, and could do many things that only humans could do. The next morning, the two of them arrived at the Science and Technology Park in Hangzhou. They found the address given by the other party, made a call, and soon, someone rushed over. The person was a man in his 40s, and he was amazed when he saw the Empress. He then restrained his expression and said to the two of them, "Are you Mr. Run from the phone? Hello, I'm the sales manager of Linkage Intelligence. My name is Jiaohan." Ren Baqian smiled playfully. Most people introduced themselves with the surname Li or Zhang, but the other party couldn't say that his surname was Jiao. "Excuse me." Jiaohan knew what Ren Baqian was thinking by looking at his expression. He smiled generously and didn't seem to mind. "Please follow me." Jiaohan smiled and led the way. The three of them went all the way to the 15th floor before arriving at a laboratory that wasn't very big. A computer took up about half of the space. The remaining half of the space was filled with all kinds of robots. Half of them were humanoid or half-humanoid. Some of them even had a layer of silicone skin. They looked very similar to real people. From a distance, it was really not easy to tell that they were real just by looking at their upper bodies. After all, this was the other party's specialty. Ren Baqian looked at these robots that were more beautiful and exquisite than humans, and thought that it was no wonder their company's products were selling well overseas. He had to admit that these things were really the welfare of an otaku. With such simulated robots, if they had a certain level of intelligence, the future population would probably be worrying. However, this was a problem for the higher-ups and had nothing to do with him. On the contrary, the Empress didn't think as much about these things as Ren Baqian, or rather, she didn't think about these things at all. She looked at the robots in front of her with interest and pinched her face. "You're hurting me." The robot that was kneading the face of the Empress suddenly opened its eyes and said. The electronic voice sounded a little weird and spoke very slowly. However, the content gave the Empress and Ren Baqian a shock. "This is a joke." The robot grinned. It looked stiff, but it was a smile. "Do you know what you're talking about?" Ren Baqian took a few steps forward to take a closer look. The silicone skin of this robot extended from the top of its head to the bottom of its neck, and it had a temperature that was close to that of a human. Its appearance was exquisite, and it was very much in line with the Eastern aesthetic standards. Appropriate jokes can shorten the distance between people, including robots, the robot said. Do you have a name? Yeah, this is my name. If you can remember it, I will be very happy. Can you think? Thinking is a very difficult question for me to answer, but it is also a trait that I hope to possess. But judging from the current situation, I still have a long way to go. How did you do it? Ren Baqian turned to look at Jiao Han and asked. According to the database, she will give different answers in different situations. Just now, when this lady was pinching Yuya's face, she was woken up from standby. In this aspect, even if we aren't the best, we aren't much worse than other countries, Jiao Han said with a smile. He was very satisfied with their reactions. Yuting, you have a guest. The two half-bodied robots beside Yuya opened their eyes upon hearing Jiao Han's voice. With a slow electronic voice they said, Hello guest. Hello Manager Jiao. Look, they can be woken up from standby by calling their names. Jiao Han laughed. I'm starting to have confidence in the capabilities of your company, Ren Baqian exclaimed. It had to be said that these robots, which weren't well known in the past, were too surprising for Ren Baqian, whose knowledge of technology was still 3 years old. Next, Jiao Han demonstrated some of the abilities of the robots. During his observation, Ren Baqian realized that the performance of the robots in terms of intelligence wasn't as outstanding as he had imagined, but they had already met most of his requirements. The only problem was that these robots were connected to the database through the network. Ren Baqian didn't know how far the robots could go after disconnecting from the network. I don't see anyone from the lab? Ren Baqian asked. This is the exhibition area. Today is the weekend, so most people are on vacation, Jiao Han replied. Please follow me to my office. Next, Jiao Han brought them to his office. Apart from him, there was also a bespectacled lady who was said to be from the lab. Jiao Han poured them a cup of tea and asked, What requirements do you have for the robots? I want the robots to be able to complete university-level teaching tasks. Unlike the monotonous teaching methods of your home robots, they can be as active and interactive as possible. Just like a real teacher. Jiao Han nodded. Using a robot as a teacher was something many people wanted. It was actually quite difficult to reach the stage of interactive teaching, but it was not impossible. As long as there was a huge database, it could be done in another way. Without the network, the data is stored in the robots. Jiao Han looked at the bespectacled lady. The lady pondered for a while and said, That depends on what kind of data you want to store. The amount of data can't be too large, or it will reduce other aspects of performance. The lady's voice was a little hoarse. Mathematics, logic, chemistry, biology, Ren Baqian replied. If it's a university course, it can be done. The lady nodded. Hearing this, Jiao Han also laughed. It needs to be able to project mathematical formulas, derivations, physics, and the steps of chemical experiments in a simple and clear way. In addition, I want it to have a mechanical style, such as a transformer or a Gundam. Can they move on their own? It's best if they can walk on their own and charge themselves. In addition, the battery must be high. I don't want a toy that will run out of battery in less than 10 minutes. Ren Baqian listed out some of the requirements he had in mind. Finally, the other party gave him a price of 16 million yuan for a teaching robot that could last for half a day, charge itself, project images, and interact. Ren Baqian immediately ordered 2 units. As for the delivery time, it was 3 months. After both parties signed the contract, Jiao Han asked curiously, I'm a little curious about what you do, Mr. Ren. After all, using such an expensive robot for this is a little, forgive me, a little wasteful. At present, such custom-made robots could only be considered toys for the rich, and he could understand any strange requirements. However, the strangest thing was that the person in front of him only asked for teaching capabilities. 16 million yuan could hire 2 teachers for 1,600 months, which was 133 years. In other words, 266 teachers for a year and 26 teachers for 10 years. I'm a village teacher. The robots are prepared for the children in the mountain villages. Renbaqian's reply stunned Jiao Han and he laughed. Village teacher? This was just a joke from a tycoon, and anyone who took it seriously would be a fool. However, when he thought about the two robots that only asked for teaching capabilities, Jiao Han felt that this wasn't impossible. He glanced at the Empress. The story of a rich second generation who went to a village to teach in order to impress his sweetheart immediately formed in his mind. After leaving the building, the Empress whispered into Renbaqian's ear and asked, "Did you say that Dayo is a village?" Renbaqian tilted his head, and the Empress's soft red lips gently brushed against his face. Renbaqian felt that this was the truth. However, the Empress's expression seemed a little dangerous, and her eyes were full of ridicule. Chapter 559. Renbaqian and the Empress returned to Dayo before the two idiots returned. On the way back, Renbaqian was still thinking about how the two idiots managed to become guests of honor at Fatso's place. In addition, they ran a red light on a horse, injured the police officers, beat up everything that couldn't be beaten, smashed baths, and destroyed prostitution dens. The experiences of these two people were really colorful. He had already prepared the wine and was waiting to hear the story. Don't think about it. Go back and pacify the rebels. I'm going back to Lan City. I miss it a little, the Empress said. Renbaqian held the Empress's hand with one hand and supported a pile of boxes with the other. There were still flash bombs and hand grenades inside. Stun grenades were much more powerful than hand grenades when used properly. The scene in front of them instantly changed and appeared in a room in Dayo. The sound of wind and rain reached their ears. Renbaqian walked to the window and opened it to take a look outside. The sky was gloomy, and bean-sized raindrops were falling. I don't know if it's raining in Yoshin City as well. I'm afraid that the commoners won't be able to withstand such heavy rain. We should mobilize the doctors and medicinal ingredients in the city to send them over, Renbaqian said. After encountering a disaster and escaping from the city, they were terrified. If they were to encounter such heavy rain, many people would fall ill. You make the arrangements. The Empress held a dog-shaped robot in her hand. It was specially sent over by Jiao Han the next day. It didn't have many functions, but it was much better than the ones on the market that cost hundreds or thousands. Such a robot dog cost tens of thousands of yuan. It would run around its home, groan when it sensed the Empress's touch, gnaw on furniture, eat shoes, and bite curtains. Renbaqian always felt that the function of this robot dog was very mysterious. How much hatred would one have for someone to give this to? Wasn't this a robot version of a husky? However, the Empress quite liked it. When she saw that the robot dog was about to bite a chair leg, she put her finger into its mouth. The robot dog immediately let out a whine, turned a few rounds on the spot, and began to do somersaults on the ground. Renbaqian thought for a while. Could it be that the Empress liked huskies? He could give her a nest of them, and then the palace would no longer be peaceful. Imagine a bunch of huskies letting loose in the palace. They didn't even send an umbrella over, Renbaqian mumbled as he walked around the room. Let's wait. The Empress gave the robotic husky a kick, walked behind Renbaqian, rested her chin on his shoulder, and looked out of the window. Renbaqian felt two soft points pressing against his back. He turned his hands around and tried to wrap them around the Empress's waist. However, the Empress grabbed his hands and raised them to both sides like a cross. Or rather, Jack and Ruth at the bow of the Titanic. However, there was only a drain outside the window. If they wanted to jump, they could only jump into the drain. Your Majesty, this isn't fair. He turned his head, and the skin at the corner of his eye touched the Empress's forehead. Since when did you learn to say the word fair? The Empress moved her nose close to his ear, and her hot breath blew on the base of Renbaqian's ear. Remember, the strong don't need to be fair. Renbaqian deeply agreed with what the Empress said. From a personal point of view, fairness was something the weak would say when seeking to change their situation. The strong didn't need to be fair. However, from the country's point of view, there needs to be fairness. Otherwise, the country will fall into chaos. This is the reason why the emperor should be punished like the commoners. Who punished me? The Empress asked in a clear voice. Your Majesty is always right. If you have any doubts, please refer to the previous sentence. Renbaqian laughed. The Empress smiled as she rested her head on Renbaqian's shoulder. The two of them stood quietly in front of the window for a long time before seeing Qing Yuan come over with an umbrella to check if they had returned. The rain was heavy, and the umbrella was for one person. Qing Yuan's clothes were mostly wet and stuck to her body. The Empress let go of Renbaqian, took a few steps back, and jumped on the robotic husky with her toes. She immediately fell into her arms. Thank you, Miss Qing Yuan. Renbaqian opened the door and took the umbrella from Qing Yuan. He waved at the Empress and said, Your Majesty, I got someone to send an umbrella over. This umbrella can't withstand such a heavy rain, and I'm afraid that it will wet your clothes. After taking a few steps, he felt the raindrops hit his body along with the wind. After leaving the courtyard, Renbaqian found a guard to bring an umbrella to the Empress. He went to the courtyard where Wang Baobao was locked up, and saw that fool squatting under the eaves watching ants move. He didn't care that his body was wet, and his thin clothes stuck to his body, outlining his bud-like figure. To put it simply, she was as flat as Lin Xiaola, with no breasts, no butt, and nothing to look at. When Renbaqian returned to his courtyard, he saw Zhuolong standing outside with an umbrella and a sword in his other hand, blocking the raindrops brought in by the wind. Sir. When Zhuolong saw Renbaqian, he immediately kept his sword, and his body began to be wet from the raindrops. What's the matter? Renbaqian asked. There's news from Hu City, Zhuolong said. Come in and talk. Renbaqian brought Zhuolong into the house and asked him to wait for a while. He went to the back hall to change his clothes before coming out. What's the situation? Renbaqian asked. Previously in Yoshin City, he specially asked about Hu City, but there wasn't any news from him. He thought that Hu City had died in the chaos or in the fire. After all, Hu City wasn't very strong, and was only at the advanced level of the Manwu level. This kind of strength was considered pretty good during normal times, but he basically didn't have the ability to protect himself in a war. Renbaqian didn't expect him to actually be alive. I received the secret letter a day ago. Xiaokuan and Rao Yu have met up, and they are going to escape. Zhuolong took out a secret letter and handed it over with both hands. Renbaqian took it and read it carefully. According to the letter, he escaped from the city that day and mixed with an army hidden outside. Under Xiaokuan's lead, they passed through the mountains and forests, and it took them a few days to finally reach Chun City and meet up with Rao Yu. This army was the defeated army that Xiaokuan had brought with him, and it had a total of 50,000 soldiers. In addition, there were the elephant, monkey, and insect soldiers of the Six Doors. Renbaqian finally found out the number of elephant soldiers of the Six Doors, which was close to 300. He had to admit that this was a pretty good combat power. However, the soldiers were in a state of panic, and there were many deserters. There were about 45,000 soldiers left. After meeting up with Rao Yu, there were another 150,000 soldiers. However, both sides didn't dare to confront the aboriginals in Chun City, and were preparing to retreat to the south. There were only 3 reasons. The first was that they hoped that the aboriginals would divide their forces and occupy the various cities, but this possibility was slim. Before the situation was completely pacified, it was impossible to divide their forces and give the aboriginals an opportunity to take advantage of them. The second reason was to lengthen the aboriginals' supply line. After all, the aboriginals ate a lot of food. Even if they were resupplied from the various cities, the supply line would be extended, and the aboriginals' target was the supply line. There was a possibility, but it wasn't very likely. This was because if they were forced into a corner, the aboriginals would confiscate the food that passed through the cities and not leave any rations for the people in the cities. This would force some people to rebel, but it would be too late. Before these people could grow up, Xiaokuan and Rao Yu would probably be eliminated. The last possibility was that they had a favorable location in the south, and they wanted to wait for the aboriginals there for the final battle. What do you think? Renbaqian looked up and asked. Their target should be Deyunza. Zhuolong immediately voiced out his thoughts. What's that place? The lair of the Six Doors is nearby, and Deyunza is a swamp. It's said that it's very dangerous. Less than 30% of the people who go in can come out alive, and most of them die inside. It seems like it's here. Renbachian knew that he had guessed correctly. The 6 doors should know this place very well and know which places were dangerous and which were safe. If the aboriginals rashly went in, they would probably suffer great losses. If they didn't go in, they couldn't possibly keep waiting outside, right? Wait until they ran out of food and starved to death. At this thought, Renbachian got up and went out to look for the Empress. He told her about the secret letter and his conjecture. Your Majesty, I suggest that General Gong and the winged cavalry immediately set off to intercept them. We can't let them enter de Yunza. At the same time, Protector General Shi, Deputy Protector General Zhong, Captain Qing, and Lin Xiaola will also go together. The other party has 3 strange beasts and 6 spirit will experts. I'm afraid that Protector General Shi and the others won't be a match for them. Chapter 560. 10 days later, the sun shone down on the earth. People who were exposed to the outside would be drenched in sweat after a short while. The Empress Shi Wanya, Zongshen, Qingping, Gongzheng, Renbachian, and many winged cavalry warriors were waiting in the forest halfway up a hillside. It's too hot. It's either a heavy rain or a scorching sun. Renbachian moaned as he enjoyed the coolness of the shade of the trees. After 10 days of relentless pursuit, he had finally caught up to the rebel army. However, even though he had returned to Earth twice in the past 10 days, he had almost lost a layer of skin. As soon as he entered the forest, he fell to the ground and refused to get up. Sir Ren's body still needs to be trained. Shi Wanya said faintly. Apart from him, the others were basically unaffected. Yes, I haven't trained you for a long time, and you have been slacking off. This time, I will start training twice as much every day when I go back. The Empress said thoughtfully. Renbachian widened his eyes and looked at Shi Wanya before looking at the Empress. Who did he offend? A group of Cardinal Heaven bigwigs like you can't even compare to ordinary spirit will experts. I'm only a man will expert. Man will level. How can we compare to you? Your Majesty, wait until I master Li Fu's godly spear before training. Renbachian said innocently. You can't use your spirit before you reach the spirit will level. You won't be able to learn it. The Empress said faintly. Your Majesty, I have such an amazing physique. A rare talent that only appears once in 100 years. I can definitely do it. Renbachian sat up from the ground and vowed. The Empress snorted softly. She couldn't be bothered with him. She placed the robot husky beside her feet and stroked its head. The robot husky didn't even run 2 steps before it tumbled to the ground. In a flash, Qingping grabbed the robot husky and placed it beside the Empress. Only then did he exclaim in admiration. This thing is rather interesting. The person who made this thing is really amazing. An inanimate object can actually act like it's alive. Then in a flash, the Empress shot Renbachian into a tree. The tree, which was wide enough for a person to wrap his arms around it, was broken and fell to the other side. Before anyone could react, Renbachian looked down and saw that the robot husky had been grabbed by Qingping's big hand, and its entire head was out of shape. The fact that the Empress had brought it along with her all the way showed how much she liked it. Now that it had been destroyed by Qingping, he was already being merciful by only shooting him into the tree. Captain Qing, your grip is too strong. Renbachian laughed as he pointed at the robot dog. Qingping crawled up from the ground and took a look, apologizing profusely. The Empress picked up the robot dog and pinched it. The robot dog was like plasticine in the Empress's hand. The areas that were dented immediately bulged up, and the areas that were originally fine were dented. After the Empress squeezed a few times, the robot husky's head was already beyond recognition. It was completely dead. Your Majesty, I'll go back and buy you 2 better ones. Renbachian smiled bitterly. Only then did the Empress stop whipping the corpse. She reluctantly slapped a hole in the ground and buried the mechanical dog in it. This was to prevent its corpse from being exposed to the wilderness. Remember, I want to. The Empress raised her head and said to him after she was done. Everyone waited in the forest for a long time before the Baihu who had been sent out to scout came back to report. Your Majesty, my lords, The rebel army is still 2 hours away. Continue investigating. Renbaqian waved his hand. I'll go and take a look as well. Qingping stood up and said. There were still many experts in the rebel army, and if they were discovered, they wouldn't be able to return. Having an expert overseeing would always make people feel more at ease. Thank you. Renbaqian cupped his hands. He turned to look at Lin Xiaola, who was sleeping soundly on a rock nearby. The light that shone through the branches and leaves seemed to have been shattered and scattered on her body. 150,000 people. As long as one person kills 200 of them, it'll be a piece of cake. Gong Zheng counted with his fingers and didn't get it wrong. Renbaqian wanted to give Gong Zheng a thumbs up for his mathematical skills. It's not like there are 200 He Langjun. Renbaqian casually said. The wild boars in this world were called He Langjun. It was easy for one winged cavalry warrior to deal with 200 ordinary people. However, 700 winged cavalry warriors would inevitably suffer losses when facing 150,000 soldiers. Quantitative change could lead to qualitative change. 200 He Langjun are really not to be trifled with. Gong Zheng laughed. Those fellows were 3 to 4 meters tall, weighed a few tons, and had coarse skin and thick flesh. They were indeed not to be trifled with. The enemy's elephant soldiers are not to be trifled with either, Renbaqian said. With Sir Ren's things, it won't be a problem. Gong Zheng slapped his thighs and laughed. He then turned to the people below and shouted. Check everyone and make the best use of the remaining time to rest. Renbaqian thought about it, and felt that there shouldn't be any problems with 8 grenades and 2 flash bombs per person. When throwing the grenades, you must split up. Don't throw them all at once. It's too wasteful. Renbaqian couldn't help but say. Understood. In a while, the winged cavalry will be divided into 7 teams with 100 people each. They will attack from 7 positions at the same time, and break up the enemy's marching formation. The main target this time is the leader of the rebel army. As long as we find him, Shi Wanya and Zongshen will be responsible for taking his head. If an expert appears, I will naturally take action. After that, the enemy will disperse. Then we will clean up the periphery and tear apart their flesh bit by bit. There's no need to fight recklessly. In particular, if we encounter a large group of defeated soldiers, we must retreat after one attack and move around the periphery. When there's an opportunity, we will kill them with one blow. Finally, try to drive them in one direction. If they split up and escape, it will be troublesome to find them, the Empress said. This was the tactic that they had been studying along the way. Of course, even though this type of wolf pack tactic wasn't in line with the Aboriginals' combat habits, everyone felt that it was worth a try when they thought about the pitiful number of winged cavalry warriors. After another hour, the winged cavalry scattered and hid in trees or other concealed places. There was a distance of 200 meters between each team of winged cavalry. Following them were the mounted scouts of the rebel army. However, they didn't expect the Aboriginals to receive the news and go around in front of them. They had always been wary of the pursuers behind them, and not the interception in front of them. As a result, the mounted scouts only did a simple check and went back to report. The Empress was sitting on a tree branch about 7 meters in the air and swinging her legs in boredom. Renbaqian was hanging from her leg and swinging his leg in the wind like a hanged ghost. Are you coming up? The Empress looked down at Renbaqian. The view here is good. Renbaqian followed the Empress's legs in an arc in the air. He suddenly thought of a song. Let's paddle. However, the view here was good, and he could see the official road clearly through the gaps between the branches. He couldn't see anything from the Empress's position. As for looking up, the Empress's leg was pressed against the branch, so he couldn't see anything. At this moment under the sun, an army was marching forward with heavy footsteps. The defeat and the continuous days of walking had caused the morale of the rebel army to hit rock bottom. The 150,000 soldiers stretched for dozens of kilometers, and they couldn't see the end of the army. Everyone waited until the sky turned dark, and only half of the rebel army had passed. At this time, they were in the middle of the rebel army. However, the leader of the rebel army was nowhere to be seen. Renbaqian swung up from the branch and let go of the Empress's leg. She grabbed his arm in midair, and pulled him to sit beside her. Your Majesty, do we continue to wait or use another tactic? Renbachian asked. Previously, they had already predicted 2 scenarios. The first was that they didn't find the leader of the enemy. They would charge forward and kill one wave before retreating. They wouldn't want unnecessary casualties. Just like hunting a powerful beast in the mountains, they would exhaust their blood and strength bit by bit. There was still a 5-day journey from here to Dyunza, which was enough to drain their blood dry. Everyone hoped for the second scenario. As mentioned above, they would immediately find the leader of the rebel army, launch a surprise attack, and behead him. Then they would defeat the rebel army in a wave of attacks, and finally pursue and kill them. I'm hungry. The Empress looked at him first. Renbachian took out a Snickers bar from the bag at his waist and stuffed it into the Empress's hand. Your Majesty, have some dessert first. Lin Xiaola, who was on the tree beside them, perked up her ears. She stepped on the tree and landed on the one that Renbachian and the Empress were on. She hugged the tree trunk with both hands and looked at the bag at Renbachian's waist. The Empress took the Snickers bar and instructed, inform Gongzheng not to act rashly. Wait until nightfall to investigate. Renbachian grabbed a handful of candy and gave it to Lin Xiaola. Did you hear that? Chapter 561. Renbachian had seen the Great Xia army set up camp, and everything had its own set of strict rules. Every day, the scouts would report back on the suitable location to set up camp. After the commander chose the location, he would use tree trunks and tough branches to build a simple wall to block the enemy's line of defense. Sometimes, 2 trenches would be dug outside the camp, or caltrips would be sprinkled to form another line of defense. Everything in the camp was arranged in an orderly manner. Large pits were dug at regular intervals to serve as toilets. If Great Xia was a regular army, these rebel soldiers would be reduced to refugees in Renbachian's eyes. Setting up camp? No. Public toilets? Similarly, no. Dozens of rebel soldiers surrounded the bonfires below, all of them lying on the ground in a disorderly manner as they rested. If anyone wanted to go to the toilet, they would do so in the wilderness. Renbachian rubbed his chin. With the quality and morale of these rebel soldiers, a single charge from the Protectorate of the South would probably be enough to defeat them. After pondering for a while, Renbachian turned his attention back to the Empress. At this moment, the 2 of them were sitting side by side on a tree branch. The surroundings were dark, and the rebel soldiers were noisy at the foot of the mountain. It was quiet on the mountain with the occasional sound of beasts. Renbachian leaned to one side and nudged the Empress with his shoulder. What's the matter? The Empress opened her eyes and looked over. It's nothing. Renbachian smiled. After a while he nudged the Empress with his shoulder again. The Empress narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Her gaze was so clear that it was as if she could see through his heart. She didn't say anything and directly grabbed his collar, lifted him up and shook him until his entire body went limp. Only then did she place him back on the tree branch. She used 2 fingers to gently clamp his clothes to prevent him from falling down. Renbachian couldn't possibly say that he was just fooling around. His entire body felt numb as he leaned on the Empress's shoulder and said, I just feel that it's pretty good to sit here quietly with your Majesty. Umph. The Empress let out 2 soft snorts. The moonlight is so beautiful. The Empress looked up and saw that the canopy of the surrounding trees blocked most of the sky, so she couldn't see the moon. She removed 2 fingers from Renbachian's clothes and pulled his face, asking, Where's the moon? In my heart. Ouch, 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 ouch. Renbachian was halfway through his sentence when he felt the Empress's fingers exerting more force. After another 4 hours, it was already late at night. Finally, he received news from the north. Using his binoculars, he observed that there was a place in the north where there were more carriages near the bonfire. He also saw a person who looked like Raoyu. After all, women with that kind of body shape were rare, and even rarer in the army. That's it. The Empress immediately decided, Your Majesty, why don't we have Protector General Shi and the others make a move first, and see if they can lure out other fish? All right. The Empress carried Renbachian and landed under a tree. Under the guidance of the person who came, they arrived more than 5 kilometers to the north and found Shiwanya and the rest. Renbachian took the binoculars and looked in the direction that they were pointing at. There was a relatively large open space with a bonfire in the middle and many carriages parked around it. The campfire was surrounded by female guards, and there were also people patrolling the area. The security here was much stronger than in other places. Rao, you should be here. Renbachian nodded. Among the 3 factions, the Green Bellflower had the most women. This subject requests for battle. Qingping cupped his fists and said, "Has the winged cavalry made the arrangements?" The Empress asked. "Your Majesty, it has been arranged." Gongzheng, who rushed over, said, "Approved." The Empress flicked her skirt. The surrounding people seemed to have received a signal, and immediately looked murderous. Qingping cupped his fists at the Empress. Carrying a mace that was 1.2 meters long and 30 centimeters in diameter, he jumped down. First he approached the other party's carriage, following which he leaped tens of meters into the air from a tree. His whole body erupted with vigor, and he smashed down like a meteorite. As Qingping's aura exploded, the carriages below exploded, and figures scuttled out. Among them was a tall and fat woman, Raoyu. She was carrying a pair of golden scissors and dodged with agility that didn't match her figure. Boom! There was a loud sound in the dark night. With Qingping as the center, a large crater with a radius of tens of meters formed. Whether it was the horses or the people inside, they were all turned into mincemeat. "It's Qingping. Be careful." When Raoyu was running for her life just now, she caught a glimpse of Qingping and hurriedly shouted, "You actually chased after me?" She then asked Qingping with an ugly expression. "Ha ha 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 ha, I'm here to take your head." Qingping stood in the large crater, laughed and jumped out. With a swing of the mace in his hand, the guards in front of him were swept away like broken dolls. With a sweep, Qingping leaped again and smashed toward Raoyu. Renbachian looked at Qingping's jumping figure from the mountain, and felt that he was a jumping barbarian. Raoyu nimbly dodged again, and then retreated to the back. 2 elders blocked Qingping's way. "Where are Shiwanya, Zongshan and Qi Zixiao?" Everyone turned their heads and looked around, trying to find out where the others were. Everyone knew that Qingping couldn't possibly be here alone. With that, Shiwanya and Zongshan walked out of the forest step by step with the aura of a towering mountain. "We are here on Her Majesty's orders to wipe out your traitors. Why aren't you giving up?" Even though they already knew that Qingping wasn't alone, everyone's expression changed when they saw these 2 people. There were 3 Cardinal Heaven experts, and they were the ones in front of them. Previously in Wu City, it took 9 people to fight them to a draw. Now that Qingyun's sword and Zhuocheng, who had condensed their heaven-grade weapons, had surrendered to the other party, the remaining 6 spirit will experts of the rebel army wouldn't be a match for these 3 people. If it weren't for the 3 strange beasts, these people would have to think of a way to escape. "The rest of you, come out together. Where's Qi Zixiao?" 4 more people appeared beside the 2 spirit wheel experts. Now all 6 of them were present. "You are just a bunch of thieves. Why do you need Her Majesty's help?" Shiwanya laughed. "I have nothing to say to you. I'm here to take your heads." After saying that, he placed the long-handled broadsword at his side. With a stomp of his foot, the broadsword swept toward the necks of the 6 people. Only a faint white line could be seen in the night. These people couldn't even feel the slightest sound of the wind. Seeing this broadsword, their expressions changed drastically and they retreated. After the broadsword, there was a boom in the air. It was as if even the air had been cut open. At this moment, the air collided with each other. Zongshan also made a move at the same time. His body suddenly leaped, and everyone felt that it wasn't a person but a huge saber-toothed tiger that leaped over. The broadsword was the saber-toothed tiger's fangs. If they were slightly slower, they would be buried in the tiger's mouth. "Die, you traitor!" Qingping passed 2 people and rushed toward Raoyu. At this moment, Raoyu had already retreated 100 meters. Hundreds of guards stood between them, but as Qingping waved his mace in the air, they were sent flying to both sides like broken dolls. Tisk tisk. Raoyu's guards were all women with beautiful faces and good figures. Under the hands of this boorish Qingping, they couldn't even be seen as human beings. Why haven't those three strange beasts come out yet? They can't have run away, right? Ren Baqian muttered as he watched. With the momentum of the three of them, as long as the other party wasn't too far away, they would immediately be discovered. With the speed of these experts, it would only take a moment for them to arrive. Chapter 562. Half of the guards are gone, and the two sides are 50 meters apart. Qingping swung his staff again and sent a bunch of rotten dolls flying. There are still 6 guards left. Qingping swung his staff once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times. 6 people were sent flying in 5 strikes. 2 of them hit 2 people, and the last one twisted his waist. Qingping is invincible. He is already close to Raoyu. Raoyu has nowhere to hide and is filled with fear. Raoyu draws her sword and fights, but she is sent flying. If those 3 strange beasts are going to appear, this is the last chance. The last chance. The last chance. There is no chance. Raoyu was smashed into a pie by Qingping. It was like a rolling pin smashing into a dumpling, and the dumpling filling spilled out. The Empress thought about the scene that Ren Baqian described, and suddenly felt that her appetite had been affected. She slapped the back of his head and complained, "Are you talking about the news?" The Empress watched a lot of news broadcasts on Earth and understood everything about Earth through them. She had a deep impression of them. Ren Baqian smacked his lips and said, "Raoyu is dead, and those 3 strange beasts didn't appear. I'm afraid they have escaped, and Xiaokuan didn't appear either." At this time, a shout came from the foot of the mountain. "The leader of the bandits is dead. Aren't you all going to kill yourselves?" The Empress ordered, "Kill them." After finishing her sentence, she sat on a rock at the side. It was obvious that she wouldn't have the chance to kill them this time. Gong Zheng gave the order, and many winged cavalry warriors charged toward the panicking rebel soldiers. Before they could get close, flashbangs exploded in front of them one after another, blinding them. The aboriginal soldiers wore a monocle on one eye. As long as they were a certain distance away, they would be able to close one eye. The other eye was covered by a sunglass, which didn't affect their charge even if there were flashbangs. "Ah, I'm blind, I'm blind." One of the dozen idiots covered one eye and almost fell. "Serves them right." Ren Baqian couldn't help but curse when he heard the shouts from below. This bunch of idiots had told them so many times, but they still fell for it. "Zuoleng," Ren Baqian called out. "Sir Ren, bring some men to the north to find traces of Xiaokuan and the 3 exotic beasts. Also look for the elephant, monkey and insect soldiers. They should be among the rebels. If you discover them, don't stop them. Report back immediately." After Ren Baqian finished speaking, he thought for a while, took out 16 or 17 flash grenades from his bag, and threw them to Zuoleng. "Use them to defend yourself. When you use them, remove the ring and throw them in front of the opponent." "Thank you, my lord." Zuoleng cupped his fists and whistled. All the Baihu in the forest gathered towards him. Zuoleng divided everyone into 8 teams. Each team had 2 flash grenades, and the 8 teams disappeared into the night, heading towards the north to search. After everyone disappeared, Ren Baqian looked down the mountain and saw groups of winged cavalry cutting up the rebel soldiers. A small group of rebel soldiers didn't even last 2 rounds before collapsing in a pool of blood. Subsequently, the winged cavalry began to kill in all directions. When they saw a large group of enemy soldiers, they threw a series of grenades to blow them up before rushing forward to kill them. In addition to Raoyu's death, the rebel soldiers at the foot of the mountain were harvested like rice straws in an extremely short period of time. The rebel soldiers nearby either died or fled. The rebel soldiers in the distance also began to flee due to the commotion. It was chaos everywhere. The situation seemed to be very good. However, Ren Baqian knew that even if the winged cavalry went all out, how many could they kill? It would be fine if Raoyu and Xiaokuan were dead. Now that Xiaokuan was still alive, it seemed like this battle wasn't over yet. The most important thing now wasn't to chase after the rebel soldiers, but to find Xiaokuan's location. Of course, there were also the spirit will experts below. Ren Baqian looked down. After Qingping killed Rao Yu and joined the battle, these spirit will experts were already blocking left and right. He looked back and finally found Lin Xiaola, who was sitting under a tree and dozing off. Time to wake up and get to work. Ren Baqian pinched Lin Xiaola's face, which was so tender that water could be squeezed out. Water could really be squeezed out. Ren Baqian's finger was full of saliva, which made him want to curse out loud. He conveniently rubbed Lin Xiaola's body twice to get rid of the saliva. There are 6 spirit wheel experts below. I'll give you 500 grams of candy for each one you kill, and you'll lose 500 grams for each one that escapes, Ren Baqian said. Lin Xiaola, who had just opened her eyes, moved her ears, and stared blankly at Ren Baqian. After a while, she realized what Ren Baqian had said and immediately disappeared. Ren Baqian picked up his binoculars and looked into the distance. He didn't know who had scattered the bonfire, but he could only see the silhouettes of a few figures below with the help of the moonlight. He could also hear the sounds of weapons clashing and roaring, as well as the sounds of air compression and explosions, as well as the sounds of weapons smashing on the ground. Ren Baqian put down his binoculars, sat beside the Empress, and said, "Just a little bit more. We're still missing Xiekoan and the 6 doors." The Empress was expressionless, but she was sick of Tianjing Basin. She had been delayed here for too long, and it seemed like she couldn't leave for the time being. The 2 of them sat there quietly. The battle at the foot of the mountain was still going on, but the sounds of it had started to move into the distance. The Empress's ears twitched as she heard some sounds. Not long after, Ren Baqian also heard it. It was the sound of someone running in the forest, accompanied by the sound of heavy breathing. There weren't many of them, only about 3 or 4 of them. It seemed like they were a few clever and lucky rebel soldiers who had escaped from the winged cavalry. They thought that this place should be safer since the winged cavalry had rushed down from here. After all, there was a saying on Earth: the most dangerous place is the safest place. Even though this saying didn't exist in this world, there was a slang saying with a similar meaning. Running toward this place had indeed allowed them to escape from being hunted down, and this made them extremely happy. However, there was still the Empress on the mountain, and she was more terrifying than everyone at the foot of the mountain. Furthermore, there were more than 10 bodyguards, and any one of them could easily kill them. That was as far as their luck went. The 2 bodyguards silently walked in the direction of the sounds. A moment later, a few blood-curdling screams could be heard. It was another night of killing. By the time dawn arrived, only blood and corpses were left at the foot of the mountain. Regardless of whether it was the rebel soldiers or the winged cavalry, they had already run further and further away during the night of killing. As dawn broke, the Baihu from the Protectorate began to come back one after another. "Sir, we found the elephant soldiers, but only the elephants are there, and the people are missing. We haven't found the rest, and we speculate that they may have escaped from the west," Zhuoleng reported after compiling the information from everyone. Ren Baqian thought that the other party probably felt that escaping with the elephant soldiers would be too easy to expose, so they even abandoned them. "Where are the elephants?" Ren Baqian asked. "They ran towards the east. Send a few people to chase after them. Don't let them get too far away. Try to see if you can bring these giant elephants back. After all, they were domesticated, so there should be a way. If it doesn't work, follow them and leave marks along the way," Ren Baqian instructed. These elephant soldiers were good stuff. If they could be controlled, they could be sent to the Protectorate of the Northeast to fight against the Yun nation. These elephant soldiers were less lethal to the Aboriginal soldiers, but they were very useful against the Yun nation's battle formation. Those ordinary people were like ants in front of these giant elephants. After another few hours, Shiwanya and the others came back one after another. They had a few wounds on their bodies, but with their recovery abilities, they could only be considered minor injuries. "Where's Lin Xiaola?" Ren Baqian looked behind the 3 of them and didn't see Lin Xiaola. "One ran away, and she went to chase after him," Qingping replied. Chapter 563. Lin Xiaola threw the unrecognizable head at Ren Baqian's feet, and looked at him with an embarrassed expression. Her eyes were filled with the word candy. I'll bring it to you in 2 days, Renbaqian said as he threw a handful of candies to her. Lin Xiaola stuffed the candy into her arms with a satisfied look on her face. The airport on both sides had finally become 2 steamed buns. Otherwise it would be awkward to have one big and one flat. Then she lay down and drooled. Renbaqian didn't know if she was tired, but he felt that she might be hungry. She even fell asleep and kept smacking her lips. The winged cavalry came back one after another in the evening of the same day. With the group as the starting point, tens of thousands of corpses were spread out in a fan shape, especially in the north and south. Large piles of corpses were gathered together, like a purgatory. After resting for a night, they split into 2 groups and continued south. Among them, Qingping and the winged cavalry were responsible for clearing up the routed soldiers that were running towards the south. As for the northern side, the Protectorate of the South was responsible for it. Meanwhile, the Empress Shi Wanya, Zhongshan, Lin Xiaola, and Renbaqian led some of the Baihu from the rearguard commandery straight to the 6 doors in the south. If he guessed correctly, the people of the 6 doors must be preparing to escape back to their lair. Xiaokuan was most likely with them. After traveling for another 3 days, they finally arrived at a location outside the 6 doors. Whether they were going to the Great Cloud Swamp or the 6 doors, they would have to pass through this location. Many of the people from the 6 doors were at the Manwil level, and some of them weren't even at the Manwil level. This journey would take at least 5 days, and it would be even slower if they took a detour. They weren't in a hurry. Renbaqian first dispersed the people from the rearguard commandery, leaving at least 2 Baihu at every place where people might pass by. After that he returned to Earth, but when he returned, the other party still hadn't arrived. However, there was one more thing in Renbaqian's hand. It was a 2-palm-sized box with a display screen and a probe lens. This was an upgraded version of the detector that Yang Sun had brought last time. Its upper limit had been raised from 1,500 to 4,000. It didn't detect combat power, but vitality. However, vitality was equivalent to combat power to a certain extent. Renbaqian first took a glance at Zuolong. The number on the screen below the lens rose rapidly, and finally stopped at 960. Renbaqian was shocked. Zuolong's blood and qi were actually so high? After all, he had completed the visualization of fire after consuming Shueka. He had completed 3/5 of the 5 visualization, and he had only increased it from 158 to 201. It was equivalent to 40 ordinary people, or 10 special forces soldiers. He estimated that he would only have about 400 blood and qi points when he reached the Earth embryo realm. One had to know that he had eaten 2 heaven and earth treasures. One was Su Wen's peach, and the other was Ning Saichen's Shueka. There were still many medicinal effects hidden in his body, and his blood qi value was much higher than that of an ordinary will expert. However, Zuolong's blood and qi had reached more than 900 points, which was 4.5 times of Renbaqian's. Renbaqian estimated that Zuolong was at the advanced level of the Earth will level, which was also known as the Earth embryo realm. As long as he perfected the Earth embryo realm and passed through the heavenly gate, he would be able to attain the spirit will level. In addition, he was from the largest spiritual mountain sect in Tianjing Basin, and the other martial artists weren't much stronger than him. In other words, the upper limit of an Earth fetus's combat power was between 1,000 to 1,200. Renbaqian looked at the other guards that the Empress brought with her. Their combat power was between 1,000 to 1,300, and these were just the ordinary guards in the palace. The real experts like Gongzheng held positions in various departments. No wonder it was said that the martial artists from Great Xia and the other countries were far inferior to the aboriginal warriors at the same level. The martial artists who had reached the upper limit of the Earth embryo realm were only comparable to the ordinary guards in the palace, let alone the ordinary Earth will experts. In the aboriginals, the four-way heaven was equivalent to the man will level, the Kismet heaven was equivalent to the Earth will level, and the cardinal heaven was equivalent to the spirit will level. Gongzheng and the other guards were also at the Kismet heaven level, but they were much stronger than the palace guards. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to become the captain of the winged cavalry. 5 or 6 people at the same level wouldn't be his match. Rinpoche guessed that Gongzheng was probably close to the peak of the Kismet heaven level, and was close to the cardinal heaven level. His combat power was between 1,600 to 1,800. It was a pity that Gongzheng wasn't in front of him and couldn't verify his guess. Rinpoche pointed the detector at Qing Ping, and the numbers on the monitor jumped wildly again. Rinpoche even suspected that the monitor would explode again. When the monitor stopped moving again, Rinpoche looked at the numbers and swallowed his saliva. There would be no harm without comparison. He was used to interacting with many spirit will experts and aboriginal bigwigs, so he didn't feel anything. Now that he was using the detector, he finally knew what the difference was. The number on the monitor was 3,115. It was more than 15 times that of his. One had to know that the difference in combat power wasn't just 50%, but it was the difference between boxing champion Mike Tyson and an ordinary person. One had to know that after reaching a certain level of cultivation, the value of blood and chi was only one of the values. There were also differences in strength, speed, resistance, reflexes, and the 5 senses. More than 15 times. This was probably the difference between a weak chicken and a huge elephant, right? Rinpoche looked at Zongshan again, and the number was 3,669. When he looked at Shiwanya, Rinpoche was already afraid that the detector would explode. He kept his face far away for fear that it would explode. Based on the current value of blood and chi, he could only rely on his face to make a living. 3927. Shiwanya's value of blood and chi had reached the upper limit of the detector. As for the Empress, there was no need to look at it at all. Rinpoche guessed that the value of the Empress's blood and chi was at least 5,000. The scientists on Earth had set the upper limit of the detector at 4,000, because they thought that it was sufficient. It turned out that the scientists on Earth still underestimated the strength of super experts. It was probably poverty that limited their imagination. After all, the practitioners on Earth that they could come into contact with were already very strong, and they only had a value of about 100. What are you doing with that thing? It's been half a day. The Empress said. Your Majesty, do you still remember the detector from last time? This is a new one. It can check a person's blood and chi and estimate their strength. Rinpoche carried the detector to the Empress's side, and pointed the lens at each person to let the Empress see the values on it. Lin Xiaola's value of blood and chi was 2,299, which was unexpectedly low. Although Lin Xiaola's strength was originally lower than Qing Ping's, Rinpoche thought that her value would be around 2,600, and didn't expect it to be only 2,300. This is quite interesting. What about me? The Empress and Rinpoche put their heads together, and looked at the numbers with interest. Your Majesty's strength can't be detected by this device, Rinpoche said. This sentence made the Empress and the others on a different level. Although this was the truth, it sounded more pleasing to the ear. The Empress deeply agreed with him. She looked very happy, but she still pretended to be indifferent. Isn't this how things should be? Shiwanya and the others also came over to look at the blood and chi value displayed by Rinpoche's detector, and clicked their tongues in wonder. This thing was really fun. It wasn't that accurate to measure spirit will experts. After all, spirit will experts didn't have high blood and chi values, but they had spirits and heaven-grade weapons. Lin Xiaola was the same. Although her blood and chi value wasn't high, she was good at speed and the strange moves or hunting techniques from her memory. This made the gap between her and Qing Ping's strength much smaller than the difference in blood and chi value. In the past, Rinpoche only knew that the experts in this world were very strong, but he didn't know how strong they were. Now he finally had an idea. For the next 2 days, every time a Baihu came back, Rinpoche would use the detector to take a look. Through this data, he had a complete understanding of the strength of an Earthwill expert. Among those Baihu, the one with the lowest blood and chi value was only about 500, and he had just advanced to the Earthwill level. The others had values ranging from 600 to 900, and there were 2 people with higher blood and chi values than Zwileng. They were Zhu Nong and Xie Yunbing, both from the hidden village. Among them, the strongest was Xie Yunbing. His hair and beard were all white, and he looked like an angry lion. His blood chi value was a full 1,245, and he was no weaker than an ordinary guard. In addition, these martial artists of the Jianghu had a variety of moves, and many of them had ultimate skills, so they might even be slightly stronger. After waiting for a few days, everyone started to get a little impatient. After all, they had mobilized so many people just to deal with a few people. Even the Empress was waiting here. However, after waiting for so long, there was still no sign of the other party. The Empress lost her temper 3 times a day. Qing Ping and Shi Wanya were shot into a tree by the Empress, and Renbaqian was tied to a tree branch by the Empress. As for the thing that was used to tie Renbaqian up, it turned out to be the metal chain that was eating and drinking in his mind. Renbaqian was still hoping to use the metal chain to tie people up in the future, for example, to play binding play. However, it turned out that the metal chain was more afraid of the Empress. Fortunately, they finally found traces of the people from the 6 doors, and Renbaqian was able to free himself from the tree. He pushed a book, My Savage Ancestor. The ancestor was a woman. Chapter 564. Among the hills, 70 to 80 people were hurrying along nervously. From time to time, they would look back as if there were some ferocious beasts chasing after them. Commander Xie, De Yunza is just 15 kilometers ahead. We will be safe once we enter De Yunza. Even if Qi Zixiao personally makes a move, it will be difficult to find us inside, Mr. Bu, who was still wearing a colorful feather shawl, said as he pointed to the front. Everyone was finally able to relax a little. 30 li. They would be able to reach it in half a day. It's better to be careful, Xie Kuan said. Don't let anything happen to us during this last stretch. Although he said this, his expression was also a lot more relaxed. He turned his head to look behind him and saw 2 boys and a girl on the backs of 3 guards. If not for the guards, these 3 boys and girls wouldn't have been able to reach here with their physical strength. Among the 70 to 80 people, half of them were members of the 6 doors who had bronze-colored skin and wore colorful feather shawls. Among them, the ones with white feather shawls were elephant trainers, the ones with bags all over their bodies were insect keepers, and the ones with red feather shawls were monkey keepers. The remaining half were Xie Kuan's guards. As the saying went, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even though they were running for their lives, there were still dozens of guards following them. Other than that, there was also a giant black bird, a giant python, and a group of monkeys that were running and jumping around. Renbaqian and the others stood in a forest in the distance. Renbaqian used his binoculars to look at everyone's expressions and laughed. They seemed to be quite relaxed. Do they feel that De Yunza isn't far away and that they are safe? Will they feel hopeless when they see us? They will feel hopeless, Zuolong answered. As for Shi Wanya and the others, those who needed to clean their weapons and rest were doing so. I reckon that when they see Protector General Shi, their psychological shadow will break through the horizon. Renbaqian put down his binoculars and gave Zuolong an admiring look. Sure enough, it was necessary to bring along a sidekick. Otherwise, it would be awkward to say it himself. Sir, I can understand the horizon, but what is psychological shadow? Zuolong diligently asked. Renbaqian crossed his arms in front of his chest and pondered. After a long time, he still couldn't figure out how to explain. In the end, he gave Zuolong a look of disdain and said, "You won't understand even if I explain. Principal Run, prepare the firewood and water. We will be eating that giant snake and bird tonight." Shi Wanya picked up the long-handled saber that was lying across his knees and stood up with a smile. It's not a giant snake, it's a Mongshan iron head. Slurp. Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the treetop above his head, didn't forget to correct the name even in her sleep. Once he opened his mouth, the water would flow 3,000 feet straight down. He almost thought that it was raining. Your Majesty, we're leaving. The earlier we settle this, the earlier we can return. Shi Wanya, Zongshen, and Qing Ping cupped their fists at the Empress. I'll go too. Lin Xiaola jumped down from the tree. It was rare to see her so enthusiastic. He didn't know what kind of deep hatred she had for Iron Head Mongshan. When the fight starts in a while, finish off the rest and don't let anyone escape, Renbachian said to the Baihu from the rearguard commandery. This time, more than 20 Baihu from the rearguard commandery were all at the earth will level. It could be said that it was foolproof to eliminate 70 to 80 people. Shiwanya and the other two landed in front of Xiekuan and the 6 doors. Shiwanya laughed and said, "Where else do you want to go? Let's stop here today. You should be honored that I'm here to take your lives." A few Cardinal Heaven experts intercepted a group of Earth Wheel and Man Will experts, some of whom weren't even at the Man Will level. This group of people could be considered lucky. Shiwanya, Xiekuan and the others were horrified when they saw the 3 people in front of them. They didn't expect that they would still be blocked by them after making such a big detour. Die. Shiwanya raised his saber and slashed out. The air in front of him exploded, and a ravine appeared on the ground. Behind Xiekuan, a person suddenly exploded. It was as if a bomb had been buried in his body and exploded into flesh and blood. How? Not far away, the reddish-brown monkeys first stood on end as it pounced toward Shiwanya. The crow general also charged toward the 3 of them. It flapped its iron wings horizontally and collided with Qingping's mace, producing a loud sound. Qingping was sent flying more than 4 meters by this wing attack. Subsequently, the crow general jumped up again, flapped its huge wings, and tried to grab Zhongshan with its iron claws. After missing its attack, it adjusted its center of gravity in the air, and lowered its head to peck at Zhongshan. Renbachian watched this giant bird jump up and down, peck, and claw with his binoculars from afar. An inexplicable sense of familiarity arose in his heart. When he was young, his grandfather's old hen used to peck at him like this. As for the Mongshan iron head, it coiled up with its upper body upright and kept hissing. Surrounding it was Lin Xiaola's figure, which was so fast that it couldn't be seen clearly. "They are moving to one side," Renbachian reminded after watching for a while. Seeing that Shiwanya and the others were moving to one side, Zuolong and the rest rushed out without Renbachian's instructions and surrounded the remaining people. Following a series of whistles, the monkeys in the distance pounced towards Zuolong and the rest. The insect keepers also shook off the bags hanging on their bodies, and poisonous insects crawled out and surrounded everyone. Despite this, they couldn't withstand the attacks of the people from the rearguard commandery. Most of these monkeys weren't at the Man Will level, and only a few of the stronger ones were equivalent to Man Will experts. Their only advantage was their speed. However, no matter how fast they were, they couldn't reach the level of an Earth Will expert. Almost every slash of a sword would dismember a monkey. In just a short while, the surrounding area was littered with monkey corpses. The reddish-brown monkey that was fighting with Shiwanya in the distance let out a mournful cry, threw Shiwanya, and pounced over. However, it had no choice but to twist its body in midair to avoid Shiwanya's slash from behind. Afterward, it let out a mournful cry while dealing with Shiwanya's continuous attacks. The ground near the 2 of them seemed to have been plowed as gullies covered the ground. "It's finally over." Renbachian stood there and sighed as he watched a Baihu cut off Xiekuan's head. "Your Majesty, why is it that every slash of Shiwanya's seems to emit saber energy? Almost every slash leaves a mark on the ground. Why can't you see this situation? Is it because you concentrate your power at one point, and this is a manifestation of perfect control?" Renbachian asked. The Empress looked at him with disdain and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? I should have told you to read more books. Shiwanya's technique is like this. In addition to the saber in his hand, there is also saber energy that blends into the ground and explodes under the enemy's feet. The marks on the ground are traces of the saber energy. What about Captain Qing's mace? I don't see him carrying it with him usually, but he takes it out every time there is a battle. It can't be a heaven-grade weapon, right?" This time, the Empress didn't look down on him. She explained faintly, "When his mace was forged, a cloud crystal was integrated into it. As such, it has some special functions, just like your saber that can change its length at will. However, your saber is too brittle and will break at the slightest touch." The 2 of them chatted while paying attention to the battle in the distance. The first strange beast to die was unexpectedly fast. It was the monkey with long reddish-brown fur. When the group of monkeys died, it went crazy. Then, Shiwanya seized the opportunity to take a punch from it, and chopped off one of its legs with a backhand slash. Rather than chopping it off, it was more like knocking it off. The monkey's skin was like copper and bones of iron. Shiwanya's saber broke its bones, but its skin was still attached. Not long after, the monkey died under Shiwanya's saber. Shiwanya slashed its head 3 times before it was split open. Following which, everyone on the battlefield was completely wiped out. Not a single one of them managed to escape. The iron-headed mountain was finally dead. After the Crow general ran away, it was first chopped into 2 by Zongshen. Then, Qing Ping smashed its head more than 10 times with his mace before it died. It was indeed an iron-headed beast. We have finally killed all of them. The Empress wrinkled her nose and smiled. She was in a good mood. Chapter 565. In the evening, a team of more than 2,000 people and hundreds of carriages were on the road from Gu City to Tianjing Basin. Between Tianjing Basin and Gu City, there was an endless stream of various caravans. Although caravans with more than 1,000 people weren't rare, they could occasionally be seen. In particular, when many caravans traveled together, it was impossible to tell if they were a single team, or if there were even more people. It was just that in the past 2 months, the number of caravans traveling between Tianjing Basin and Gu City had decreased significantly. The war in Tianjing Basin had hindered the footsteps of many caravans. Furthermore, the checkpoints on the road from Tianjing Basin to Gu City were stricter. Many large caravans couldn't get a pass, and some caravans with the backing of the 3 major powers were even killed. Following that, a few small caravans that were previously unknown developed extremely quickly within the past month or so and monopolized most of the supplies in Tianjing Basin. Behind these small caravans were the shadows of one, or even several sections. Behind these sects was the shadow of an organization called the Rearguard Commandery. However, this team was different from the other caravans. This was an army that would make people lower their heads at a glance from afar, not daring to offend them in the slightest. The Winged Cavalry, the strongest combat force of Dayo, which had entered Tianjing Basin 3 months ago, had returned. At the same time, the imperial carriage of Dayo's Empress, Qi Zixiao, who was ranked 5th in the world, also returned. Almost no one outside of Tianjing Basin knew about the death of Spirit Spear Tengyu. Otherwise, if the news of Qi Zixiao killing Tengyu spread, it would probably cause another shock. In addition to the Winged Cavalry and the Empress's imperial carriage, the most surprising thing was that there were many people from Tianjing Basin in the team. This surprised many people. This is Gu City. Qing Yunsword muttered to himself in the team. First time here. Ren Baqian heard him and turned to ask. No, the last time was 70 years ago. It's so long ago that I can't remember. Qing Yunsword shook his head. His eyes flickered, and it seemed like he was very uneasy. The people who followed behind Ren Baqian all had uneasy looks in their eyes. After 70 years, they had finally come out. This time, they didn't come to Gu City with the caravans to purchase all kinds of supplies like before. No matter where they went, they felt like they were inferior. By coming here this time, they had become a part of this place. This is the first time this old man has come here. Last time, I came down from the mountains. Li Fu stroked his beard and smiled. Li Fu, Qing Yunsword, Zuocheng, Zuoleng, a few guards, 2 newly promoted Qianhu, a few Baihu, and the 3 Confucian scholars from the Great Xia were all in the group. Xie Kuan had been killed a month ago, but the Crow general had escaped. It was just a strange beast, so no matter how strong it was, no one would take it seriously. After that, Shiwanya was mainly responsible for clearing up the fleeing rebels. Ren Baqian, on the other hand, arranged for the purge of many sects in the south, dealt with the matters of the Rearguard Commandery, and formulated a new system for Tianjing Basin. First, Tianjing Basin was divided into 6 districts. There were 3 districts in the north and 3 in the south, and they were known as the 6 lower prefectures. Each prefecture was garrisoned with 1,000 aboriginal soldiers, and a newly established prefecture army. If the people of Tianjing Basin wanted to go from one prefecture to another, they would need to have Dao guidance. The cities in the 6 lower prefectures only had city commanders who were responsible for issuing decrees and handling government affairs. They didn't have military power. The guards in the cities were under the jurisdiction of the prefectural army of the 6 lower prefectures, and had to be rotated every 3 years. As a result, the 6 lower prefectures were firmly under the control of the imperial court, and it would be extremely difficult to rebel again. In addition, Ren Baqian scattered the rearguard commandery across the 6 lower prefectures, and recruited a large number of strong men to ensure that there was a baihu in every 3 cities. In addition to the cities where the baihu was located, the other 2 cities had to have at least 1 zongqi, 2 xiaoqi, 20 tiki, and hundreds of strong men from all walks of life hidden among the people. This wasn't a difficult task for the sects that had invested their wealth in the rearguard commandery. As a result, any movement in the 6 lower prefectures could be heard by Ren Baqian through the rearguard commandery. The headquarters of the rearguard commandery in Tianjing Basin was called the Tiannan Garrison, and it was located in Gu City. After all, they could only contact Ren Baqian through the radio station outside of Tianjing Basin. Other than the winged cavalry warriors and 300 soldiers from the Protectorate of the South, the rest of the people in this group were people from Tianjing Basin. Most of them were craftsmen, and a small number of commoners who were brought back from the north. This time, there were very few casualties in the north. Most of the rebels came from the south, so the control in the south was stricter than in the north. This time, the people selected were also from the north. There was no need to mention the craftsmen. The commoners were prepared to stay in Lan City as small vendors, or do odd jobs in the city. This was to let the aboriginals get used to seeing people from Tianjing Basin from time to time, and get along well. Ren Baqian was working hard in the direction of what he had told Qingyun Sword before. This wasn't only for the people of Tianjing Basin, but also for Dayo. It was unstable to walk on one leg, and Dayo was currently walking on one leg. Ren Baqian had high expectations for the role that these remnant people of Tianjing Basin could play. Sitting on the fork-horned cow, Ren Baqian thought for a while and said to the people behind him, "Don't call yourselves remnant people in the future. It will always remind people of your past. In the future, you should be at ease and integrate into Dayo as part of Dayo." Qingyun Sword understood what Ren Baqian meant, exchanged glances with Suicheng, and replied, "In that case, let's call ourselves the Jing tribe." The Jing tribe of Tianjing Basin. In that case, let's call them that. Ren Baqian nodded. It seemed that not only the aboriginals, but even they couldn't let it go so easily. As the group began to enter Gu City, the people behind Ren Baqian sized up the city entrance with apprehensive and hopeful eyes. The commoners in the city also began to size up some people at the back of the group with curious eyes. For the next few days, the Empress contacted Lan City and the other protectorates to handle various matters. Although there were reports sent every day, it wasn't as convenient as using the radio to chat in the group chat. On the other hand, Ren Baqian settled down the people from the rearguard commandery. At the same time, he asked Gongzheng to allocate some manpower to send the commoners and craftsmen to Lan City. Of course, there were also the hundreds of carts of goods, which were the biggest material harvest from this rebellion. Other than the sects in the south that had surrendered, the rest of the sects had all been wiped out. The materials and gold from those sects were naturally used to enrich the national treasury and the Empress's small treasure house. All the secret manuals were given to Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian was preparing to build a huge library in Lan City. All the secret manuals of the sects would be placed in it. After that, he would also collect the secret manuals of the aboriginals and fill them in. Chapter 566. In Dayo, a small city that wasn't on the main road, didn't have any special products, and had a population of only tens of thousands of people. The salt team is here. The salt team is here. As a convoy entered the city, the people in the city immediately boiled over. Many people ran to a certain place in the city with their bags of salt. When they reached the place, They found that it was already densely packed with people. A young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes stood in the crowd, and felt the crowd behind him. He turned his head and looked behind him before shouting, "What's with the crowd? This time, the convoy is only a little big. It's already pretty good if 1 out of 10 people can buy salt. Those at the back might as well go out of the city to pick up stones and lick them. If you are late, there won't even be any stones left." The so-called pick up stones and lick referred to a type of marble outside the city that was bitter, salty, and slightly poisonous. However, there was a shortage of salt these days. Many people had no choice but to go out of the city to pick up this kind of stone and lick it before eating it. If Rinpoche was here, he would know that this was a type of carbonate rock. Following the young man's words, the people at the back immediately started cursing, and soon, a chaotic fight broke out in the crowd. An old man in his 70s or 80s jumped 2 to 3 meters high and kicked out with a strong gust of wind. An auntie on the street punched many people in the eyes with her fists. Even a 10-year-old child darted in and out of the crowd and occasionally kicked the groin from time to time. Fighting was the nature of the Aboriginals, and this was true even for the seemingly simple residents of this small city. As a result, fighting over a small matter had become a common occurrence. The basic process usually went like this. "What are you looking at? What's wrong with looking at you? I'm going to beat you up." Then there was a round of punches and kicks. It was just that a large-scale battle like today's would only happen every time a salt team arrived. Due to the lack of salt, many people felt that they were getting weaker and weaker. By the time the newly formed militia stopped the fight, many people were glaring at each other with injuries on their bodies. However, after a while, they burst out laughing again. Not long after, the militia transported a few carts of salt bags to the open space in front of the crowd and started selling them at a low price under the supervision of the city commander. Furthermore, each person could only buy 2 taels. The price is so low. It's a pity that there's too little. Otherwise, we could buy more and keep it at home. There's always a shortage of salt. Dream on. Fortunately, I came early today, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to buy these. When the people at the back saw the salt in front of them, they were immediately disappointed. Just like what the kid had said, it would be good if 1 out of 10 people could buy it. When will there be more salt? Yeah. If I don't eat salt, I won't have any strength. Everyone, the Yun Nation, Chen Nation, and Great Xia have cut off our salt supply routes. It has been 2.5 months since a single bag of salt has been shipped in. The city magistrate, who was also one of the few experts in the city, stood at the front and announced loudly, "Kill them. Get the salt back. Kill them. Kill them. Kill. Kill. Kill." The crowd below immediately began to shout. The originally simple and honest citizens were immediately filled with murderous intent, and their faces also revealed fierce expressions. If people from other countries were to see this scene, they would understand why the Aboriginals were able to contend against other countries with such a small population, be it in terms of population, financial resources, or equipment, and even win against them. Even though these commoners had lived on this plain for 70 years, their bones were still filled with that kind of wild nature. Even children who didn't grow up fighting with ferocious beasts in the mountains were still full of the desire to fight. Everyone, Dayo no longer needs to transport salt from the outside world. Dayo has its own salt pans, the city magistrate said. When these words were spoken, everyone below was stunned. Dayo's salt was completely transported from other countries. This was something that even children knew. Since when did Dayo have its own salt pans? First of all, I want to thank Sir Run, the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy. He was the one who researched how to produce salt from the brine in the mountains. Everyone below pondered one after another. Where was this Black Bamboo Academy? Who was Sir Run? They didn't remember such a person in the imperial court. After a long time, someone finally remembered that this person couldn't be the gigolo that Her Majesty had found, right? Which gigolo of Her Majesty is this Sir Run that you are talking about? Someone asked. How rude. The city magistrate's face darkened. Then he pondered for a while. Even though these words were a little disrespectful to the Empress, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with them. He knew a little more than the commoners, and had heard about some of the things that happened during the war with Great Xia in the north. However, he still saw Renbaqian as a gigolo, let alone the others. He is a gigolo because his face is white, the city magistrate added. I didn't say anything else. The voice from the crowd made everyone laugh. The city magistrate might as well not have said anything. In any case, thanks to Sir Run, we have salt to eat. However, this salt has only been produced for a few months, and needs to be transported to various cities. As a result, there is a little less salt now. However, there will be more and more salt in the future. Everyone will have it, so you don't have to worry. Even though the people below were all laughing, the tension caused by the lack of salt had been alleviated a lot. Furthermore, their impression of Renbaqian had improved greatly. Renbaqian's reputation among the commoners had improved a lot during this period. Renbaqian and the Empress stayed in Tianjing Basin for more than 3 months. Many things had happened in the outside world. There were 3 things that attracted everyone's attention. The first was the war between the Protectorate of the Northeast and the Yun Nation. Before the Empress entered Tianjing Basin, Zhu Wuzhen had scattered the allied warlords into the interior of Dayo to destroy villages and strongholds. This was exactly the same tactic that Great Xia had used. In the early stages, many of the villages at the border were destroyed, but the villagers taught the allied warlords a lesson. The number of soldiers was less than 2,000, and they were repeatedly defeated by a village of about 100 people. This made the allied warlords lose a lot of face. The reason for this was that the defenseless villages didn't have the time to move, so there was no way out. They fought to the last man, and wouldn't stop until he was dead. However, if the casualties of the allied warlords' young masters exceeded 15%, they would retreat, and if the casualties exceeded 20%, they would collapse. In addition, most of the adult aboriginals were at the manual level. As a result, the Yun Nation's advance in the early stages was extremely slow. By the time they learned from their painful experiences and formed a large army, the newly trained new army arrived. The result was obvious. When Renbaqian and the others returned to Gu City, Zidonglai had already conquered 4 cities in the Yun Nation. The second thing was that the Chun Nation had already declared war on Dayo. The war in the southeast wasn't intense. Both the Zhua Nation and the Chun Nation didn't seem to have much interest in fighting. Both sides stared at each other at the border every day. Occasionally there would be a small fight, but it was more like an exhibition than a war. Dayo was happy to see this, but they didn't know how long this situation would last. The third and most important thing was that the salt transportation routes from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chun Nation to Dayo had been cut off. Since the Chun Nation sent their troops, not a single grain of salt had been transported into Dayo. This made many people very nervous. Fortunately, the imperial court had recently released a batch of salt. There were 100,000 stones of salt, which was 1.2 million kilograms, which was enough for more than 3 million people to eat for a month. After some restrictions, it could barely be enough for 7 million people. In addition, the imperial court was vigorously promoting the fact that Renbaqian had researched how to produce salt in the mountains. The people of Dayo still had a high degree of trust in the imperial court. What happened in that small city was happening everywhere, which eased the tension in various places. However, only a few people knew that this amount of salt had been accumulated over the past 6 months. Although salt wells had been dug and the saltworks had been expanded, the salt production speed had increased significantly over the past 3 months. However, only 30,000 stones of salt were produced every month, which was barely enough for 1 million people. Next, the most important thing was to rely on Zidonglai to seize the salt in the Yun Nation. As a result, the Empress's first order was for Zidonglai to occupy the Yun Nation as quickly as possible, and send all the salt found in every city back to Dayo. Following the Empress's order, Zidonglai completely let loose and attacked like a raging fire. Chapter 567. Renbaqian wanted to go back to his courtyard and have a good sleep. However, the moment he stepped into the palace, he was summoned by the Empress to attend a court meeting. For a full 4 hours, Renbaqian explained the situation in Tianjing Basin, as well as some of the arrangements. Then he listened to the reports of the other people and almost fell asleep. Only then did he drag his exhausted body back to the courtyard. As soon as he entered, he saw 2 big fellows with dark circles opening their bloody mouths and pouncing toward him. "Oh, you still remember me?" Renbaqian laughed heartily as he lifted Gungun above his head and rubbed his face against its furry body. A foul smell stained his face. After all, even though these 2 little fellows weren't hungry, they wouldn't be bathed every day. He tossed Gungun aside, rubbed Tiantian's head, and planned to return to the house. In the end, Gungun's forepaws hugged each of his legs. It seemed like the 2 little chaps missed him a lot. After shaking off the 2 little fellows with great difficulty, Renbaqian went back to his room to take a look. After he left, someone cleaned the room every day, and it was very clean. He then fell asleep on his bed. On the other hand, after the court session was over, Lian Liang from the Department of the Army strolled toward the area where the people from Tianjing Basin had just settled down after entering the city. Qin Chuan saw him greeting people as soon as he left the palace, but he just smiled. His identity wasn't convenient, and Lian Liang's plan was very much in line with his intentions. To put it bluntly, Tianjing Basin had been in chaos for so many years. Even though they had surrendered, the people from the Ministry of War were the most displeased with them. They had to be beaten up first before anything else. Before Renbaqian returned, he had contacted them through the radio station and built a brick and tile hut near the city wall to serve as a place for the people from Tianjing Basin to stay. In other words, it was a street that was completely sealed off and surrounded by high walls. There was only one entrance and exit, and there were guards stationed there. This was to prevent people from finding trouble with them. After all, Tianjing Basin had been restless for so many years and had provoked the Empress. Even though these people had returned here with the Empress, there were still many people who would find trouble with them. Because of this, he had specially arranged for people from the Public Order Division to patrol the vicinity every day to prevent any trouble from happening. However, the Public Order Division could stop ordinary people, but they could not stop Lian Liang from the military division. Not only did they not stop him, but they also stood far away with an expression as if they were watching a good show. Lian Liang brought his men to the end of the street and placed the broadsword in his hand that was exactly the same as Qin Chuan's on the ground, and roared, "All of you come out!" Following this shout, the commoners of Tianjing Basin who had just been settled here from afar immediately trembled in fear. Qingyan Sword's heart skipped a beat. He jumped out of the courtyard and landed at the intersection of the street. He cupped his hands towards Lian Liang and said, "Sir, what can I do for you?" Although he had already guessed that there would be trouble, he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Although he didn't know who the person in front of him was, he felt a chill in his heart when he saw the people from the Public Order Bureau watching from afar. "Cut the crap. I'm here to fight. You have been causing trouble for so many years. Now that you have come to Lan City and my territory, let me see where you get your guts from." "Sir." Qingyan Sword's mind was racing. How should he resolve this matter? On one hand, he could swallow the insult and humiliation. However, he and his men had just arrived, and someone had already come knocking on their door. If he swallowed the insult and humiliation, he was afraid that he would be looked down upon, and his days in the future would be even more difficult. However, if he were to fight with the other party, he was afraid that he would anger the other party and the others, and there would be endless trouble in the future. Come. Let me beat you up first. I'll let you see how sharp my broadsword is." Lian Liang didn't care what Qingyan's sword was thinking and slashed at him. "Sir, you are so heroic." The attendants behind him cheered and laughed at the same time. If Renbaqian or Tang Xinye were here and heard this, they would be overjoyed. Indeed, if the upper beam isn't straight, the lower beam will be crooked. The words that Minister of War Qin Chuan always said were used by Lian Liang just like that. Qingyan's sword was startled. He pointed with his sword, and the long sword on his back soared into the sky with a clang. It transformed into a ray of white light and pierced toward Lian Liang. Lian Liang swung his broadsword horizontally and deflected the sword. Then he slashed again and again with his broadsword. Each slash was powerful, heavy and extremely fast. In just 6 or 7 slashes, there was a loud bang at the end of the street. The pillars on both sides of the street were chopped down, and the signboards fell to the ground. Qin Yun's sword was also forced to retreat step by step under the ferocious slashes of the broadsword. Qin Yun's sword changed his sword technique, and the long sword in the air split into 7. Like swimming fish, they circled toward Lian Liang. "Is this all you've got?" "That's all you've got," Lian Liang said contemptuously. Then, he swept his broadsword around his body, causing a gale to blow across the entire street. Clang, clang, clang. After a series of collisions, the 6 long swords in the air were smashed into pieces. The last one rolled a few times in the air, and fell back onto Qin Yun's sword's head. Lian Liang took a deep breath, and then let out a beast-like roar. The muscles on his body bulged. His body leaped more than 10 meters and slashed at Qin Yun's sword with his broadsword. It felt like a tiger pouncing on a sheep and was unstoppable. The air stirred along with the broadsword in his hand. Clang. The long sword in the air was only blocked for a moment before it was sent flying. Qin Yun's sword retreated continuously from the corner of the street all the way to the middle of the street. His forehead was dripping with sweat. This aboriginal official of unknown origin actually had such terrifying strength. He wasn't much weaker than the god of massacre, Shiwanya. Previously, when he exchanged blows with Shiwanya, his vitality had been greatly damaged. Now he couldn't use that sword technique anymore. However, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. It was as if the other party wouldn't stop until he killed Qin Yun's sword. Noisy. At this moment, a voice came from a nearby courtyard. A short black rod flew out from the courtyard and collided with Lian Liang's broadsword. This caused Lian Liang's broadsword to pause, and the aura that he had accumulated to the peak was knocked down. Instead of being shocked, Lian Liang was delighted. He laughed and said, "There's actually an expert here? However, I don't care what kind of expert you are. Take a blow from me first." After he finished speaking, the long sword dashed toward the courtyard like a dragon. "You've disturbed my sleep." An old man with white hair and beard, who looked like a beggar, appeared outside the courtyard. The short rod in his hand pointed at Lian Liang's dragon-like broadsword. Clang. The long sword in Lian Liang's hand exploded, following which, the short rod pointed at his chest and sent him flying, crashing into a courtyard. "You guys can continue fighting. Don't make a fuss and disturb my sleep." Li Fu smashed Lian Liang's long sword with one strike and sent Lian Liang flying. Only then did he turn around and return to the courtyard. "Thank you, Senior, for your help." Qin Yun's sword cupped his fists in gratitude. "What has it got to do with me? It's just that he was shouting so loudly that he disturbed my sleep." Li Fu's voice came from the courtyard. "Sir." Lian Liang's guard hurriedly ran over and found Lian Liang in a pile of rubble. He was vomiting blood while holding the hilt of his broadsword. His expression was as if his heart was being pierced by a knife. "My broadsword. Aha. If you continue to make noise, I won't hit your broadsword. I will hit your balls." Li Fu's voice came from afar, which made Lian Liang go crazy. If it was anyone else who came looking for trouble but ended up hitting an iron wall, they would definitely feel ashamed and resentful. However, Lian Liang didn't care. In any case, he was used to being beaten up by Qin Chuan. However, the problem was his broadsword. 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 He had contributed all his assets to House Yunyan. The most valuable thing he had was this broadsword. This fight had cost him all his assets. Chapter 568. Ren Baqian estimated that he would arrive at the palace banquet in the evening. Many people were already there. Generally, the lower the position, the earlier they arrived. This was the case even in this world. Principal Ren. Many court officials greeted him. If Ren Baqian was just a small character that the Empress took a fancy to as if he had won the lottery back then, things were different now. Not to mention his performance in the war with Great Xia. The radio station's instant communication played a great role in this technologically backward world. The border and the imperial court could communicate with each other in a timely manner every day. This was a great information advantage that allowed Dayo to respond to any situation as quickly as possible. It allowed them to dispatch reinforcements and assign troops more accurately. Of course, in the eyes of the ordinary officials, the most important thing was the salt works in the mountains. If the salt route had been cut off previously, Dayo would have been anxious. They would have rushed to attack, engaged in bitter battles, and set up ambushes. However, the existence of the salt works gave Dayo more room to maneuver strategically. Although they didn't understand this term, it didn't mean that they didn't understand it. As a result, Runbachian became a strange but very capable person in the eyes of many officials. He was strange because he was different from the aboriginals. His fighting strength was completely weak. He was capable because he came up with many things that had great effects and effects. Runbachian found his seat and sat with a few officials from the Ministry of Works. "How's the farming going recently?" Runbachian asked Go Ihong. In fact, when he came back, he saw the sweet potato vines and pumpkins in the fields far away from Lon City, and felt that they should be doing well. Very good, very good. Go Ihong immediately smiled when he heard the question. Those pumpkins and sweet potatoes had already been harvested for 2 seasons, and were all used as seeds to promote them throughout Dayo. These products were effective quickly, had high yields, and tasted good. Although they weren't as easy to exchange for meat or sell in the market as vegetables, they had a large yield and could fill one's stomach. As a result, the promotion went smoothly. "Sir Ren, do you have any new crops on hand?" Go Ihong rarely saw Runbachian. His mind was filled with his old business, so he immediately changed the topic to new crops. "If there is a suitable one, I will send it to Lord Gu." Runbachian thought for a while. In fact, there were many crops on Earth that could not be found in this world. However, at present, what Dayo needed the most were crops with high yields that could fill their stomachs. Furthermore, these crops had to be compatible with Dayo's tropical mountainous climate. Therefore, there wasn't much room for choice. After chatting with Feng Ho for a while, Runbachian heard a maniacal laughter coming from the entrance of the hall. It sounded like the voice of Tong Jinya. Following that, Qin Chuan angrily scolded. "Old man, if you don't shut up, this old man will let you have a taste of the sharpness of this old man's blade." "Ha ha 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 ha. Old man, why don't you pull out your knife for me to see? Even if I stretch out my neck for you to chop, you won't be able to do it." Tong Jinya yelled crazily as he spoke. Following that, the sound of fists and kicks could be heard from outside. The two of them had started fighting outside the hall. Many people who were nearby ran out to watch the show. They were just a bunch of onlookers who didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Even though the two of them were rank 3 officials, if the two of them were to fight, there wouldn't be anyone to stop them. The surrounding people were all munching on melon seeds, peanuts, and other nuts to watch the show. When Feng Ho, Go Ihong, who was beside Runbachian, heard that there was a fight outside, he dragged Runbachian out excitedly to watch the show with a smirk on his face. "What's going on?" Runbachian knew that something was up when he saw their expressions. "Is there a super expert among those abandoned people?" Feng Ho remembered that Runbachian definitely knew about those people and quickly asked. "Who provoked them?" Runbachian immediately became spirited. It was indeed a super expert who was at least as tall as a 30-story building. Yesterday, Lian Liang wanted to give them a good beating. In the end, his weapon was broken and he suffered some minor injuries. When Sir Qin found out about this, he shouted, "Let me show you how sharp my blade is," and tried to test that person's trick. In the end, his weapon was also broken and his balls were beaten. Feng Ho laughed heartily. Runbachian immediately looked like he was in pain. This Qin Chuan was really unlucky to bump into an iron plate. He didn't even try to find out about the other party's background. Li Fu's identity wasn't a secret. It could only be said that the aboriginals were used to being overbearing. After all, the big shots in the imperial court were all Cardinal Heaven experts. They didn't care about who their opponent was and only cared about where their opponent was. When everyone arrived at the entrance of the main hall, they heard cheers from both sides. Runbachian looked up and saw Tong Jinya's 13 consecutive groin kicks. One kick after another, his feet never left his lower body. One had to know that Tang Jingye used to use the 13 consecutive, Black Tiger Steals Heart, technique. Qin Chuan was jumping around like a little girl. His legs were kicked a few times, and he looked like he was going crazy. Sir Run, who was that person yesterday? It seems like Sir Qin is in a lot of pain. Feng Ho asked with a smile. He was also a little curious. Both Run Liang and Qin Chuan weren't weak, but they couldn't even last a few moves against the other party. Li Fu. Never heard of him. Feng Ho thought for a while and shook his head. The #1 expert in the world, Li Fu. Ren Baqian said unhurriedly. Li Fu had always been looking for the stairway to heaven and rarely appeared. Most people only knew that he was the #1 expert in the world, but not many people knew of his name. In addition, this name was a little too down to earth and sounded like a villager from the mountains. Most people wouldn't be able to recall this name. Ha! Feng Ho turned his head in shock. Why was Li Fu here? A few people with good hearing were also surprised. He isn't from Tianjing Basin, and met him on the road. He has some matters to attend to and is staying in Lan City for a period of time. Don't provoke him for no reason. Feng Ho continued to look surprised. In any case, that's what happened. Ren Baqian spread his hands. The two of them fought for a long time. Qin Chuan's legs weren't convenient, so he was at a disadvantage. He was so angry that his head was about to explode. On the other hand, Tang Jingye couldn't stop laughing. There weren't many opportunities for him to take advantage of others. Only when Great Elder Shiqing arrived did the two of them finally calm down. Following the arrival of the Empress, the banquet began. However, today's banquet was a little different from the previous ones. In the middle of the banquet, there was a dance performed by more than 10 young ladies from Tianjing Basin. It was the same dance that Ren Baqian saw at the Golden Ring residence. The young ladies were carefully selected and had beautiful looks. Even though they weren't heavenly beauties, they were still quite charming. This was the first time that the citizens of Tianjing Basin made an appearance. The next day, Ren Baqian heard the news that Tang Jingye went to challenge Li Fu, got his weapon broken, and got his balls kicked. Ren Baqian was a little stunned when he heard the news. He had already revealed Li Fu's identity, so Feng Ho must have already told him. Could it be that Feng Ho still wanted to seek revenge for Qin Chuan? Could it be that the two of them had some sort of romantic relationship? Next, Feng Ho was kicked in the balls by Li Fu, followed by the Minister of Justice, Shi Zhong, the head of the Public Security Bureau, by Shi, and the head of the Department of Inspection. Taiyan Ren Baqian was completely confused. Towards the end, he realized that these people clearly wanted to see the level of the world's most powerful expert. In any case, Li Fu had never been heavy-handed. To these boorish men, the attraction of the world's most powerful expert wasn't much different from the attraction of the world's most beautiful woman. After more than 10 challenges, Li Fu also received the title of the Crazy Egg-Kicking Devil. The people inside, listen up. Come out and see if my saber is sharp or not. Ren Baqian heard Qin Chuan's insolent voice when he walked to the corner of Jing Street. He saw Qin Chuan holding a steel saber from an unknown person, and making a big fuss outside Li Fu's courtyard. A few minutes later, Li Fu came out of the courtyard with a crazed look on his face. He smashed Qin Chuan's steel saber with his rod and kicked his balls before leaving speechlessly. Chapter 569. Run. Are these barbarians sick? Li Fu was furious and irritated when he saw Ren Baqian. He had been tormented miserably for the past 2 days. No matter what, they were still a group of Cardinal Heaven experts. It seemed like he could easily defeat them with 2 or 3 moves, but it took a lot of effort. Furthermore, Li Fu didn't like fighting at all. All he could think about was finding the stairway to heaven, and fighting was just a last resort. However, he didn't expect that after his first fight, this group of people would come endlessly. There would be people challenging him every day, morning, afternoon, night. Whether it was day or night, these bastards would come whenever they wanted to. If he didn't agree, they would quarrel endlessly outside. The loud voices of the aboriginals had made him nervous for several days. If it weren't for the hot air balloon and rocket that Ren Baqian had promised him, he would have knocked them over and run away. Ren Baqian was a little speechless. Although he knew that Li Fu was a good person, he didn't expect him to be this good. He really didn't know how he became the #1 expert in the world. Now it was as if he was being bullied by those old fools. In fact, although he had always been the one kicking people's testicles, it seemed like he was the one being kicked now. You are the #1 expert in the world, and you are still alive. What a great opportunity it is to see the #1 expert in the world in the flesh. Besides, who doesn't worship their idol? Even though they all have high statuses, seeing the #1 expert in the world is like seeing a young idol. Isn't this exciting? In addition, I want you to give them some pointers. Ren Baqian's words were half true and half false. Before coming here, he was really afraid that Li Fu would be anxious, so he came to take a look. However, based on the current situation, it wouldn't be a problem even if they struggled for a while. To be able to see Li Fu in action, even if it was just a few moves, was already very beneficial. Most importantly, there were many people. Almost all the people from secondary class, rank 3 and above, had been here once and were planning to come a second time. It was said that even the Minister of Revenue, Tu Wan, was tempted. Now Li Fu's place was like a famous tourist attraction. Every day, one could see all kinds of big shots in the court. Even the Jing tribe people who had just moved here were a little speechless. Black Bamboo Academy will start classes the day after tomorrow. Senior, if you have nothing to do, you can go and listen to the classes. You can also find some peace and quiet, Ren Baqian said after thinking for a while. Not interested. Just finish what you promised me as soon as possible. Li Fu waved his hand, not minding at all. He was just a little annoyed by those fellows who disturbed his peace. Seeing this, Ren Baqian didn't say much. He laughed and bade farewell. In the end, as soon as he left the courtyard, he was stopped by someone. Sir Ren, what are your arrangements for me? You can't possibly let me stay here without any status, right? Ning Kaichen had a look of hidden bitterness on his face. Those who didn't know would think that Ren Baqian had done something to him. Ren Baqian looked at the gossipy expressions on the faces of the newly assigned guards. He didn't need to ask to know what they were thinking. Then he looked at Ning Kaichen with a pair of bright and piercing eyes. If you have the guts, say it in front of the Empress. If she doesn't plaster you to the wall, consider it my loss. Ren Baqian dismissed Ning Kaichen with a few words. Recently, there really weren't any positions suitable for him. After all, with his status, there were many things that he couldn't do. Furthermore, there were already people who could do what he could. However, he really couldn't just leave a sword master here and ignore him. After a few more days, Ning Kaichen definitely wouldn't be able to stay here anymore. Ren Baqian pondered about where to place Ning Kaichen as he walked back. In the end, he was stopped halfway. Sir Ren, please come with me and say a few words. A middle-aged man and 2 young men came down from a carriage by the side of the road and called out to Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian sized them up and was slightly puzzled. Are you from the Yun Nation? The people of the Yun Nation looked similar to the people of Great Xia. However, they had always been known for their luxury and exquisite clothing. As a result, when Ren Baqian saw these 3 men in exquisite embroidered clothes, he immediately guessed their identities. Sir, my surname is Zhang, and I have met you once before. Today, I'm looking for you because I have an important matter to discuss with you. Sir, please come with me and let me say a few words. I have already prepared some food and wine in the restaurant next door. Ren Baqian looked at this man carefully, and then at the 2 young men behind him. He didn't have any impression of them. However, he really wanted to hear what they had to say. Ren Baqian nodded to the people beside him. Zuolong and the others immediately went around the inn and confirmed that there were no problems before going downstairs to report to Ren Baqian. It wasn't that he was being too careful. Anyone who had experienced a few assassinations in a year would be this careful. The 2 young men behind him lowered their heads and had a strange look on their faces. It wasn't clear whether it was contempt or something else, but they were careful not to let others notice. Ren Baqian walked upstairs under the escort of the guards and found a seat by the window to sit down. Under the watchful eyes of the guards, the 3 of them carefully sat opposite Ren Baqian. Sir Ren, the last time I saw you was a year ago. I think you already don't remember me. Ren Baqian thought about it. A year ago at this time, he should have just arrived in Dayo, and was assigned by the Empress to be the Honglu deputy, in charge of receiving guests from various countries. Did the few of you attend Her Majesty's birthday celebration last year? Ren Baqian suddenly realized. At that time, he really couldn't remember many of them. Ning Kaichen, the 7th prince of Great Xia, and that kidney-deficient young master, who vomited blood every time he made a move. These were the only people he could remember. He couldn't even remember the name and appearance of that young master from the Lien family whom he killed at that time, let alone the others. That's right. The middle-aged man nodded and smiled, following which he said, My surname is Zhang Junzheng. These are my 2 nephews, Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju. Greetings, Sir Ren. Just as Sir Ren thought, we are from the Yun nation. As the middle-aged man spoke, he carefully sized up Ren Baqian and sighed deeply in his heart. At this time last year, this person in front of him was still a Honglu deputy in name. Not long after, he became the husband of Qi Zixiao. At that time, he didn't take Qi Zixiao seriously. After all, at that time he didn't display any outstanding qualities. In everyone's hearts, he was just lucky to be chosen by Qi Zixiao. However, this luck could fall to the bottom at any time because of a slight change in Qi Zixiao's mind. In the eyes of many people, perhaps that was normal. After all, what kind of person was Qi Zixiao? He was an ordinary person with no talent and good luck. Even if Qi Zixiao liked him because of his flattery, how long could he last? Therefore, even though he and the others had been trying to build a relationship with Dayo for the past year, they didn't consider this person in front of them. This was the reason why. However, after a year, unexpectedly, this person's position had become more and more stable. This could be seen just from the attitude of the people in the imperial court toward him. Furthermore, there were rumors among the people that he played a great role in the war against Great Xia in the north. Furthermore, he produced salt in the mountains and recently went to Tianjing Basin with the Empress. Although he didn't know what he did, nearly 2,000 people from Tianjing Basin came to Lan City. He also had a few experts from the remnant citizens of the Hao nation by his side as guards. Now he had no choice but to put down his pride and reevaluate this person, and beg him for help. Even Ren Baqian, who had always boasted of his superior foresight, had to admit that he had really misjudged this time. Ren Baqian's brain spun, and finally felt that these 3 people in front of him were somewhat familiar. He then waited for them to speak and see what they wanted to say. They couldn't possibly be trying to persuade the Empress to give the Yun nation a way out through him, right? In history, there was no lack of cases of losing a direct confrontation, and then bribing the opposing party's high-ranking officials to cause trouble in their own backyard. However, if they had this intention, they could be directly dragged down and beheaded. Chapter 570. Ren Baqian wasn't in a hurry to reply. Instead, he picked up the teacup and smelled it before putting it back on the table. After taking a closer look at the 3 of them, he asked curiously, You guys aren't ordinary people in the Yun nation, right? Although the Narita Zhang family isn't a big family, they do have some reputation. Zhang Junzheng was a little proud. In fact, not only did the Zhang family have a small reputation, but it was also quite famous. Many people in the Yun nation had always thought that controlling a city was the foundation of a family. However, although the Zhang clan did not control a city, the clan that controlled the city had changed several times over the past hundreds of years, but the Zhang clan had never fallen, and every generation had a talent. It wasn't that the Zhang family didn't have the opportunity to control the city, but they gave up every time. According to the words of an elder of the Zhang clan, water had no form, and there was no way to attack it. From the Zhang clan's point of view, it might seem like they had a foothold in a city, but in reality, they were bound to it. Therefore, apart from being a family that did not attract much attention on the surface, most of the Zhang family members were scattered throughout various industries. The Narita Zhang family had always been a general name. On the surface, It looked like a plate of loose sand distributed in various industries. On the surface, they might not seem to be related, but at the root of it, they both came from the Narita Zhang family. Even if their enemies wanted to harm them, it would be difficult for them to do so. Zhang Juanjing's two nephews had been running into walls in Lan City for a year, and the war between Dayo and the Yun nation was in full swing. In his opinion, it was impossible for the Yun nation to win this war, so time was of the essence. In order to gain Renbaqian's attention, he briefly shared some information that wasn't easily known to others. Renbaqian was astonished by what he said. He didn't expect there to be such an aristocratic family in this world. According to Renbaqian's understanding of the Zhang family from Earth, it was similar to the Huizhou merchants. It was a general term of address, but it was still linked by bloodline. Why would you want to seek refuge with Dayo? Renbaqian asked with great interest. Other people avoided the aboriginals, but the Zhang family took the initiative to approach them. This piqued his interest. The rising Cloud Nation's monarch is young and frivolous, and all the important matters in the court are handled by Prime Minister Zhang Xingmian. Zhang Xingmian was obstinate, self-opinionated, and ambitious. Currently, the people in the imperial court were either trying to curry favor with him, or they were sent to prison, or they were resigning and returning home. In a few more years, the name of the country's monarch would probably change. If that was all, it would be fine. However, Zhang Xingmian was greedy and lustful. He had great ambition but little talent. To tell you the truth, even in the face of a war with your country, the imperial court is still rejecting dissidents. This is evident. What does that have to do with you? Why don't you seek refuge with him? Renbaqian asked. No matter what the imperial court did, a clan like the Zhang clan should have a way to deal with it. He didn't believe that he would run over to the aboriginals, just because he couldn't stand the sight of the demons and monsters in the imperial court. It's a long story. Zhang Xingmian has great ambitions but little talent. He is not a good person. He has always had enmity with our Zhang family, and he knows a lot about our Zhang family. Although everything is fine now, the safety of the thousands of people in my Zhang family cannot be placed on this. So I have no choice but to do this. When Renbaqian heard this, he understood most of it. The Zhang family was afraid that Zhang Xingmian would attack them, so they were looking for a way out. Ordinary people might not know much about the Zhang family, but the Zhang family had been in the Yun nation for hundreds of years. They had existed even before the founding of the Yun nation, so there were still people who knew about their roots. It was impossible for those large clans to not know anything about the Zhang family, but they just didn't fully understand them. Zhang Xingmian probably knew a lot about the Zhang family. There was a saying that went, "The person who understands you the most is your enemy." However, the Zhang family seemed to be overthinking things. Whether it was the Yun nation or Zhang Xingmian, they were probably going to vanish into thin air. What can you do? Renbaqian asked unhurriedly. My Zhang family is involved in all walks of life, which is what your country lacks the most. I'm sure that the Zhang family will be of some use to you. Zhang Junzheng laughed. He was very confident in the strength of the Zhang family. What you know, I know as well. I know everything that you don't. Renbaqian laughed nonchalantly with a hint of playfulness in his tone. Sir, no one is omnipotent. Zhang Junzheng laughed and suddenly felt a little strange. This person's achievements over the past year, and the establishment of the Black Bamboo Academy, shouldn't be an ignorant person. How could he dare to say such a thing? One had to know that being involved in all walks of life was the foundation of the Zhang family's survival, and also the source of their confidence. As long as someone from the Zhang family was still alive, they would be able to find a way out no matter where they were. Indeed, no one is omnipotent. However, I should be omnipotent to you, Renbaqian said bluntly. The things of the Zhang family were very important to others and even more important to the previous Dayo. However, with Renbaqian around, those things were nothing. He could obtain more advanced and scientific manufacturing techniques, industrial systems, and various management methods than the Zhang family. Although it might not necessarily be in line with the situation in this world, Renbaqian believed that he could completely change Dayo as long as he was given time. The Zhang family was naturally useful, but it wasn't as useful as they thought. The biggest use for Renbaqian was to save time. Therefore, these people could be used, but he still had to suppress them. After hearing Renbaqian's words, Zhang Junjing looked slightly unhappy. The two young men behind him looked at Renbaqian with disdain. No matter who it was that was looked down upon, they wouldn't be able to stay calm. Not to mention a family like the Zhang family. The person in front of them was directly labeled as frivolous, shallow, and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The Zhang family is indeed looking for a way out, but it's not just Dayo. It's just that Great Xia is deeply rooted in all aspects. If the Zhang family were to move there, it would easily cause a backlash from the local forces. Therefore, Zhang Junzheng, who had the best foresight in the family, was inclined to move a portion of the family to Dayo. However, they had already hit a brick wall previously. If this person was such a shallow person, then there was no need for him to come to Dayo. Renbaqian looked at the expressions of the three people and realized that it was completely within his expectations. I have already made salt. I don't know if you have heard of glass cups and mirrors. I can also make your pancreas, and I can make it even better. I call it not a perfumed soap. I can also make wine, and the taste is better than yours, and the taste is stronger. Spices? Soy sauce. Soy sauce. I can do all of these. Essence? I can also do this. Wrought iron? Forging weapons? I can also do all of these, and they are more advanced than yours. I know a little about farming equipment, and even how to farm. Clothes? Textiles? I can do all of these. In addition to history, I can also do mathematics, investigation, military strategy, poetry, and local governance. What else do you know? Tell me. Let me see if there's anything I don't know. Renbaqian chuckled and spoke with great confidence. Zuoleng and the others who were following him were speechless and didn't know if it was true or not. After all, they had only followed Renbaqian for a short period of time. They believed that Renbaqian knew the art of war and knew how to govern a country. After all, some of the things that Renbaqian did vaguely had the shadow of the art of war. The rearguard commandery was also formulated by Renbaqian. From recruitment to promotion, confidentiality, and rewards and punishments, the regulations were quite comprehensive. Ordinary people couldn't do it at all. Zuoleng and the others also deeply believed that Renbaqian was proficient in this area. As for other aspects, they weren't sure. However, after hearing what he said, they felt that it was a little exaggerated. Needless to say, the three people from the Zhang family didn't believe it at first. Towards the end, their expressions became very strange, as if they were looking at a lunatic talking in his sleep. In any industry, a person might not be able to reach the peak in his lifetime. Do you know all of them? Chapter 571. In that case, it seems that Dayo isn't a place for the Zhang family. Sorry for disturbing you today. We will take our leave now, Zhang Junjing said faintly as he suppressed the anger in his heart. He originally thought that the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy was a wise person since he was able to secure his position in such a short period of time and establish an academy. Now he only felt that he was an arrogant person. It was obvious that he wasn't an aboriginal. Perhaps he had learned some things from somewhere else. Or perhaps he had developed this kind of arrogance after interacting with the aboriginals because of their stupidity. Therefore, he was an arrogant person. Such a person wasn't a good choice. No hurry. Seeing that the three of them were about to get up, Renbaqian gestured with his hand, and the guards immediately pressed them down on the chairs. Among the three of them, only Zhang Junzheng was an earth-will expert. The other two were man-will experts, so they naturally didn't have the strength to resist the palace guards. Zhang Junzheng was even angrier. Since you have already said so, why can't we leave? Sir Ren, what other instructions do you have? Since we are useless to Sir Ren and Dayo, why not let us leave? Zhang Junjing's voice was slightly cold. It's not that the Zhang family can't establish a foothold in Dayo, but your expectations are too high. To those who have never seen brass, brass can naturally be sold as gold, but not to me. If I did so, I would become a great laughingstock. If the Zhang family can live a stable life in Dayo, it won't be a problem. It can even be like how you live in the Yun nation, Ren Baqian said with a smile. Ren Baqian said with a smile. He already knew what the Zhang family was thinking after listening to the beginning. He needed some manpower, but he didn't want them to think too highly of themselves. Since Sir Ren is here, why do you need us? No, although I can do everything, I'm just one person with limited energy. I still need some manpower. You can also learn something from me as the foundation of the Zhang family. Ren Baqian said without any trace of politeness. Zhang Junzheng almost laughed when he heard this. I wonder what Sir Ren can teach the Zhang family? Zhang Junzheng emphasized the word teach. As for Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju behind him, they were not as calm as he was. If it weren't for the guards holding them down, they would have already jumped up. But even so, a layer of ice still scraped off his face. In that case, why don't we take a gamble? You can choose 3, 5 or 7 industries or manufacturing methods to compete. As long as I lose one, it will be considered my loss. I will introduce you to His Majesty and guarantee that His Majesty will not behead you. How about that? When Zhang Junjing heard what Ren Baqian said, he wasn't happy. Instead, he was angry. The other party was simply too arrogant. Allowing him to choose as many as he wanted to compete, and if he lost even one, it would be considered his loss? What kind of courage did he need to say that? Did they really think that there was no one in the Zhang clan? One had to know that the Zhang family's roots were not in the imperial court, nor were they in any line of business. Instead, the Zhang family's shadow could be seen in most of the hundreds of lines of business in the Yun nation. Furthermore, the Zhang family had grasped the core of the business. It can be said that in the Yun nation, except for a very small number of things that are in the hands of certain families, there is nothing that the Zhang family doesn't touch. Although this kind of Zhang family wasn't widely known in the outside world, it was only because the Zhang family had always followed this method to continue the family line. Even if they encountered a great disaster, there would still be a day when they would rise again. However, this didn't mean that the Zhang family didn't have the strength. Sir Ren, since you have put it this way, I would be guilty if I were to decline. There's no need for too many, just 3. Zhang Junzheng sneered. He couldn't even be bothered to ask what the other party's conditions were if he lost. Don't you want to challenge a few more? Is 3 enough? Ren Baqian naturally didn't care. Whether it was 3 or 30, it didn't make any difference to him. 3 is enough, Zhang Junzheng said proudly. If he couldn't beat this person in front of him in 3 categories, then the Zhang family would be too incompetent. Furthermore, he was certain that he would win. As long as you think it's enough. If you lose, you will have to move the Zhang family over to Dayo to assist me and learn well. If you want to run away, you should know about the 9 pavilions, Ren Baqian said unhurriedly. The Zhang family naturally won't do such a thing. Keeping our word is the foundation of the Zhang family, Zhang Junjing said. Furthermore, we won't lose. Zhang Junjing added resolutely. It's best to have confidence. Ren Baqian smiled and didn't say it out loud. He wanted to say that ignorance limited their imagination. The time will be set in 1 month. As for what the bet is, I will inform you when the time comes, Zhang Junjing said. In the end, he was still a little cautious. He was afraid that the aboriginals would capture craftsmen from the Yun nation if he told them what the bet was. As long as he didn't say anything, the aboriginals couldn't possibly capture craftsmen from all walks of life, right? Furthermore, there were many things that a craftsman couldn't know all of. For example, cloth dyeing red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. A craftsman might not necessarily know all of them. Therefore, as long as he informed the other party before the competition, the possibility of the other party cheating was eliminated. In that case, the Zhang family definitely wouldn't lose. Inform me when you are ready, Ren Baqian said unhurriedly, got up, nodded at the other party, and walked down the restaurant with his guards. As for the food and wine, it was just a pretense, and he wasn't in the mood to eat. On the contrary, he was somewhat happy to meet such a family of fools. If everything went smoothly, he would be able to earn a batch of skilled workers. If the other party went back on their words, he would just kill them all after conquering the Yun nation. After Ren Baqian left, Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju angrily said, "This person is too arrogant. Fifth uncle, are we really going to compete with him?" Zhang Junjing snorted. A competition is naturally a competition, and we can also let them see the capabilities of the Zhang family. As for what happens next, it will depend on Qi Zixiao. Qi Zixiao is the ruler of a nation after all, and he has his own plans. No matter what excuse he comes up with, he won't be easily deceived in the face of victory and defeat. However, Deyo isn't a good place after all. When the time comes, we will split into two groups, one toward Great Xia and the other toward Deyo, Zhang Junjing said as he pondered. Ren Baqian returned to the palace, sat in the garden with the Empress, and jokingly told her about what happened just now. It's really unexpected to meet someone who wants to compete in these things. It's quite interesting. Ren Baqian chuckled. The Empress rolled her eyes at him and said, "You went to see Li Fu, but you caused such trouble." Li Fu is nothing. He has a really good temper. As for this Zhang family, they are all skilled workers who can understand many things easily. It's also easy for them to do things. Ren Baqian had already determined the other party's identity. "Aren't you afraid that others will learn from you?" the Empress asked. Back then, when Deyo wanted to learn from other countries, the three emperors of Deyo remembered how the other countries blocked their technology and knowledge. It was still very difficult for the Empress to let go of this aspect. It doesn't matter if they learn something. After all, what they learn is from the past, and it's all related to the people's livelihood. The real core is still in science and technology. Furthermore, with them, it will be easier to occupy the Yun nation, Ren Baqian said. There was too much knowledge on Earth, so much that he could squander it at will. Naturally, he wouldn't care. Furthermore, a person's energy was limited. No matter how much knowledge he could obtain, it would be useless if he didn't have the energy to do it. Furthermore, the other party also had an important role. After conquering the Yun nation, they could play a significant role in pacifying the people and serve as a role model. I promised to send a batch of secret manuals to the Messier 87, but I've been busy these days and didn't have the time, Ren Baqian said. Although he had already returned to Lan City, he was still remotely commanding the rearguard commandery and couldn't let go for a short period of time. He even spent less time admiring the flowers in the garden with the Empress. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.